This is Long John with the Party Line. We're around from midnight to 5:36 mornings during the week. During that time, we have the pleasure of talking with many interesting people, and, of course, on Mondays, we get started about 1, and we continue right through till 5:30. 37 and a half hours a week talking with interesting people. I think some of you people remember that the other night I mentioned on the program that we would be talking tonight to a gentleman who gave a lecture at the New York Center. And I'm referring to Arthur C. Clarke. Mr. Clarke is one of the world's foremost authorities on the subject of spaceflight. Mr. Clarke is a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society, and for 5 years was chairman of the British Interplanetary Society. He is a well-known author, and among his books are the following: Exploration of Space, Interplanetary Flight, Childhood's End, Against the Fall of Night, and Sands of Mars. I frankly do not know what Mr. Clarke's opinions may be as far as flying saucers are concerned, but I feel very confident that before we reach the hour of 5:30 that we'll know. And, of course, our good friend Cortland Hastings is with us this morning, and Charles Leadham. Mr. Leadham is an author as well as a TV producer. The gentleman who I think will be of great interest to us tonight, as well as Mr. Clarke, is a gentleman by the name of Major Wayne S. Aho. Mr. Aho was on the program a few months ago, and I would like to mention at this time that Major Aho and Cortland Hastings will be giving a lecture at the New York Center Thursday, February 6th at 8 p.m. The address is 227 West 46th Street in the city of New York. Subject: what can you do about flying saucers? Now, Court has been on the program many times. The Major's been with us once before, and no doubt many of our listeners who are interested in the subject of flying saucers will certainly want to attend that lecture. Again, let me remind you, it's Thursday, February 6th at 8 p.m., New York Center, 227 West 46th Street. Major Aho is going to give us some of his opinions tonight about flying saucers. And he also is going to give us the official statement of Major Donald E. Kehoe. I understand that in this statement, which will be read to us, we will learn, possibly for the first time, what actually happened on the night of the telecast of the Armstrong Circle Theater, January 22nd, over CBS. Later, I've been told, Major Aho will also tell us of newspaper and radio reports of sightings of flying saucers being seen overhead by audiences of Dr. George Hunt Williamson as they left the lecture halls in the various cities on the West Coast, during which one reporter not only witnessed it, but also took photos. And we have a lot of other interesting material for you this morning. Major Aho, since that Armstrong Circle Theater telecast, there's been a lot of stories going around about what happened. I don't want to know the facts at the moment, but I was just wondering, do you think when a person claims that they've seen a flying saucer, that they should be put into a mental hospital?
Well, John, I don't believe they should. If that is the case, why, there'd be thousands of our people in the world right today in mental institutions who have had these sightings all over the world. And if we went so far as putting the people that had these sightings, had these experiences in the hospital, and we'd no doubt have to hospitalize the witnesses also, because there are a number of witnesses in many of these reported sightings. That is something that I would just like to discuss at some length later this evening, and discuss the very interesting case of Reinhold Schmidt in Kearney, Nebraska, and bring to light everything that has happened up until now.
Do you believe the Schmidt story?
Well, let's put it this way, John. I wasn't there. I wasn't a witness, but I believe that the man's story has possibilities. And if his statement can be borne out that there were 3 or 4 other witnesses that saw this same ship, and the fact that these reported landings, these reports came from many parts of the nation. I have with me some news this evening about a similar type of landing story from Long Beach, California. And when you add that to the Loveland, Texas incidents, and White Sands, New Mexico, and Nashville, Tennessee, and the fact that these are all occurring about the same day with no relationship between them. The parties did not know each other, and they occurred almost simultaneously. Then we should begin to consider that perhaps the Reinhold Schmidt story did have some merit.
And just because you've heard a lot of other stories, Major Aho, you feel that there's a possibility that the Schmidt story is true?
Well, John, I have received several letters from Reinhold Schmidt. I am aware that that right today he's back at the scene of operations. Many people know that he was sent to a mental institution in Hastings, Nebraska, which I think we should discuss at some length when you want to go into that part of the program.
He's out, though, now.
He's out, and he claims to have passed every test he demanded, according to his letter, every test they could give him, and he passed these tests. And the same company that had sent him originally to Kearney, Nebraska as a grain buyer put him right back in Kearney, Nebraska, still in their employ. So certainly some people have faith in the man.
I spoke the other day to the newscaster who's with the Mutual Broadcasting System in Kearney, Nebraska. Actually, he called me, and he was in the hotel room with Mr. Schmidt at the time. And he was under the impression that I had made an announcement, that is, Schmidt heard through somebody else, that I had made an announcement on this program that I knew that there were witnesses to the story. Well, I hadn't said that. And evidently Mr. Schmidt had the idea that possibly I would know the names and addresses of these additional witnesses, alleged witnesses. And frankly, I do not know them. I know nothing about it. Court?
Yeah, I wanted to add one small addendum there, John. I understand that one of these... very short one.
Thank you.
One of the eminent citizens of that town was a witness to this very thing. But because of the ridicule which was heaped upon it, and the great amount of censure and opprobrium, he considered it much better for the safety of his own skin and the safety of his own reputation to remain incognito. But he told individuals that he had seen it, but refused to let his name be used.
I don't want to know the source of your information, but may I just ask you this. Is this hearsay?
Probably not. Mm-hmm. I wasn't there either, John, so I can't say, but I would say the source was quite reliable.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we get into our discussion with the other guests this morning, let me take a moment to talk about this offer. You heard the statement that was made by Major Aho a moment ago. And I was just wondering, as an astronomer, and also I understand that you were 5 years chairman of the British Interplanetary Society, I think with that background, you possibly have some opinion about the possibility of saucers being interplanetary.
Yes, I think it's only a matter of time before we're visited from space. In fact, I had an article in Harper's Magazine about 3 or 4 months ago called Where's Everybody, which was on this very theme. There are at least 100,000 million suns in this one universe of ours, and we're probably a pretty backward section of it. And we've only been civilized, if we are civilized, for a very short period of time. I'm sure there'll be thousands of civilizations out there among the stars with very much higher standards than ours, and they have space travel and interstellar travel. So it's certainly only a matter of time before we're visited.
Now, when you say, Mr. Clark, it's only a matter of time, are you implying that possibly they haven't arrived here as yet?
I should think it's very probable they've arrived scores of times in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And it's even possible they've arrived in historic time. I mean, since there's been men who've recorded these things. I mean, some of Charles Fort's accounts are very hard to explain any other way except the arrival of spaceships in the Earth's atmosphere. But I don't think they're arriving now.
You don't think they're arriving now? When
No.
you say that, do you mean today?
Well, I mean, I don't think they've arrived.
Or during the last 6 months?
During the century, say.
During the century.
Mm-hmm.
You don't feel that any saucers or UFOs have arrived here from other planets?
Of course, I can't prove this, but it's my feeling that they haven't arrived. I mean, on the basis of all the evidence that
If you feel that they have arrived here from time to time from other planets, why is it that they have stopped during the past century?
Well, I don't say they've stopped, but the problem is this. Suppose you have to conduct a survey of 100,000 million suns. Mm-hmm. You have only a limited number of survey ships. Well, at a very rough estimate, you could probably only survey any one system every few thousand or few million years. And I suggest that somewhere in some enormous central filing system there'll be a file on Earth with various interesting information about it, a few thousand years out of date, saying that this planet may be worth visiting in, say, what might be the year 5000 AD to us. And they'll work around to us again sooner or later.
I'm a little speechless at this time. Charles?
Yes. Well,
are you going home?
I am going to go look for this file card, to tell you the truth. The thing that curiosifies me is this. Why must they have come, say, in Paleolithic times, and why couldn't it have been, 2 weeks ago last Monday that they brought the file card up to date?
Well, it could be any time. I'm just pointing out the statistics of it. The Earth has been here for, let's say, 5 billion years. Take a nice round figure. Roughly 5 billion years.
We've not 4 billion.
Well, let's stick to 5. I like the nice round numbers. 5 billion. We've been here, let's say, as a roughly civilized race for perhaps 5,000 years. One millionth of that total time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the chances of anything coming along in that period of time are fairly small. Now, as to why I don't think there are any visitors from space as of now, if somebody tells me they have seen a unicorn in Central Park, I say, very interesting. You may be right. If there really is a unicorn in Central Park, there will be no doubt whatsoever about the matter in a very short period of time. Similarly, if there really are spaceships hovering around this Earth, that is the sort of thing which will be settled as unequivocally as the existence of unicorns in Central Park in a very short period of time. They'll be tracked, photographed, observed in every possible way.
Well, Arthur, I personally do not buy the flying saucer thing, but I think there's an angle of motivation here. The unicorn in Central Park, I doubt would much care whether or not he was established. But if our file keepers from Planet X want to do an anonymous survey, well, then they might, very well keep out of the way most of the time, but they might slip a few times, and a few gentlemen might see them.
Yes, but if they slipped at all, there wouldn't be much doubt about that. That's not the sort of thing that you can keep quiet. I mean, it's like the girl who said that her baby was a very small one. I mean, this is an all-or-nothing operation.
True enough. That I cannot fight.
Arthur Clark, on this program, I've had the pleasure and the opportunity of talking with a lot of people, and I would say I've spoken to at least 8 or 10 people who claim that they have had physical contact with Venusians and Martians, and if I'm not mistaken, 2 or possibly 3 of these people claim that they've been in saucers and they've visited other planets. How do you feel about those things, Mr. Clark?
Well, now, all these people who claim to have had physical contact and to have actually ridden in space vehicles, they fall into 3 categories. Some of them are fooling you. Some of them really believe it and are insane. Others are possibly hoaxed by other people.
You know, somebody is fooling.
Someone of rather simple intelligence may have been fooled by some unscrupulous friends who could possibly have kidded them into thinking they had met someone from a flying saucer. I'm sure that has happened occasionally.
Well, I'd be interested to meet the man who could bring down this, 60-foot pulsating object through the sky to fool some of these people. Well, this is the guy I want to get in contact with.
Well, I'm not discussing any particular case. I'm just generalizing.
Cortlandt?
I take it that Mr. Clark feels an impossibility for somebody to have a physical contact. Is that right, Mr. Clark?
It's a possibility. It'll happen sooner or later. The point is, when it happens, there'll be no doubt about it.
Well, why do you say that?
Because this sort of thing does not happen in out-of-the-way places to obscure people.
Well, if you say it's never happened before, how can you make a statement that it won't happen in out-of-the-way places?
Because it'll happen, if it does happen even in an out-of-the-way place, that place will not remain out of the way very long.
Well, what would bring it in out of the way?
Pardon?
What would bring it in out of the way?
Well, listen, let's see. Suppose that there is someone, say a reconnaissance group, surveying this planet, which, as I said, is quite possible, and I think ultimately is a certainty. Well, now, what will their procedure? If they're anthropologists, they'll make contact with people, and they'll work up from that. But the sort of reports we've had so far are so unconvincing and so trivial, and they're so contradictory. I don't see how you can possibly take any basis of seriousness in them.
Mr. Clark, I'm interested in the statement that you just made, that you feel that the flying saucers would not contact an obscure person. Is that right, sir?
Oh, no. They wouldn't. For instance, all the reports I've said, well, most of the people who have claimed to have made contact with flying saucers, the fact that they're obscure has nothing to do with it. But they're, let's say, also peculiar, many of them. And I don't think you can deny that. Now, I'm not going to give any names, but I think you can fill in the blanks quite easily yourselves.
Well, no, I'd like to get back to, didn't you use the word obscure?
I did use that word, and I will amplify it. They might make contact first of all with, say, anybody they came up against. But you know that little famous cartoon, "Take Me to Your President." That's the sort of thing that will happen very soon after they have made contact with anybody.
I'm interested in your thinking on this, Mr. Clark. You made a statement a little while ago that you thought that possibly saucers or UFOs or spacecraft, that is interplanetary craft, had arrived on this planet, but possibly not for the past 100 years. Now, if this is true, and let us say that 150 years ago, some interplanetary craft landed on this planet and they accidentally contacted an obscure person, don't you think that that person would have taken the Venusians or the Martians to somebody of importance so that we would have a record of it in our history?
I think that's very likely, and that is one of the best arguments against this happening in historic times. So you have fairly well convinced me that it hasn't happened for this reason. Your argument is a very sound one.
So we might as well wrap it up for a night instead of play.
No, that would be most disappointing. We can go back to, say, about 2000 B.C., and then what would have happened? It would have been lost. I mean, the whole historical...
That's true.
Well, the point is, there's very
It
little...
hasn't been, actually.
Yes, but there's very little point in discussing these cases because you can never prove them one way or the other, the early cases. They can never be proved. You can argue around them till kingdom come. And there's no way that I can see, unless you make a time machine, of proving that that really was an extraterrestrial contact. So we are really stuck with the modern sightings if we want to do anything.
Cortland?
As long as we're back to 2000 B.C., which is a rather interesting and round date.
I tell you like round figures.
Sure. A friend of mine is an Egyptologist, and he's been doing quite a bit of study in that. And he says that in the Book of the Dead, there are numerous references to spaceships or machines from space. There is some reference to sun, and some people say that these are suns. But in the next paragraphs or so, it will be mentioned that these machines blot out the sun. And there are numerous references to the pharaohs going out to have conversations with these people as being those beings from outer space of greater wisdom than our own.
Well, I mean, I could match dozens of these cases from... you can take things in the Bible. I mean, you can prove up thousands of cases, quite convincing, but you could not prove them, but you can build up some very interesting cases, but you can never prove them or disprove them. So, really, there's not much we can do on the matter.
The thing that surprises me is that so much credence is attached to Egyptian mythology. Why not go into Norse mythology and talk about Valhalla and the ice gods and so forth as being, who knows, maybe frozen flying saucers? What is so much with Egypt and the Book of the Dead? This is what I don't understand.
Well, some very good cases in the Ceylonese mythology. I happen to live in Ceylon now, and there's cases in the sacred writings of Ceylon going back to about 500 B.C., where there are stories of flying machines and so on, which are quite convincing.
Well, the Book of the Dead is an extremely important book. Happens to be one of the bases. That's why I was referred to.
Court?
I'd like to go back, however, to the point of actual contact here of much more contemporary nature than 2000 B.C. That is a little bit long. I would like to mention, or go back, say, to 1947, in which Army Air Force intelligence officers had been investigating reports of unidentified flying objects at very high speeds in various sections of the United States. And on September 23rd, in fact on July 8th, the Air Corps statement at the Pentagon is, and I quote, "We are investigating a flying disc report by Navy rocket engineer C.T. Zone and 3 other rocket scientists." Now, we assume that these rocket scientists would know a UFO from something with which they were familiar. And on September 23rd of 1947, the official analysis report from the Air Technical Intelligence Center, that's where we investigate these things, Mr. Clark, out at the Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, to General Hoyt Vandenberg, who incidentally was a friend of my superiors and a very close one, commanding general at that time of the Army Air Corps, and I quote, "The reported phenomena are real," end quote. Now, there is no question there as to what they're thinking. Those words are incisive.
I think there's a great deal of question as to what they're thinking. They say the reported phenomena are real, end quotes, and anything beyond that is what you read into it and is subject to a lot of question.
They mean that they are real, that they are not anything that we have, Charles, and that they obviously are coming from outer space.
Portland, how do you know what they mean?
Because I am about to read 1948.
Good. This is what I would like to know.
You did that great. That was a good production. Thanks, Charles. You're a good end man here.
You're a good middleman, too, Court.
The Air Corps in 1948, July 24th,
seldom gets a chance.
by General
Thanks again. We'll
George
talk
C.
to you later.
Kennedy,
Thank you.
who was at that time
Bye-bye.
chief of the Strategic Air Command, after the so-called spaceship sighting by the pilots and a passenger of an Eastern Airlines plane, stated, "We're completely mystified. We have nothing remotely like the machine described. I wish we did," end quote.
That doesn't mean that they're interplanetary, though, Court. They may be from a foreign government.
It doesn't even mean there are machines.
It says all he said is we have nothing remotely like what was described by the witnesses, which means absolutely nothing to me.
In August, the date was withheld, but a top-secret estimate of the situation by the Air Technical Intelligence Center, later declassified but never released, stated that flying saucers were interplanetary spaceships.
What was that again?
Flying saucers.
Now, who said that?
A top-secret estimate of the situation. This is a document.
Do you realize...
Declassified but not released.
Do you realize that recently, I think it was just today, they was declassified a document on the use of bows and arrows in warfare, which was classified by mistake, Mr. Hastings? A lot of this top-secret classified secret estimate, which may have been by a corporal, and a demented corporal at that, is not very impressive.
I'm not trying to impress by whether it was classified or declassified.
Oh, I see. Well, what is the impressive part?
Never released.
What is the impressive part of this statement? We've been leading up with my end man bit here for 5 minutes to this statement. Now, what is the impressive part of it?
Well, I guess I don't speak good English. It
No.
said the flying saucers were interplanetary spaceships.
And this, as far as I know, this was made by a demented corporal at Dayton, Ohio. Now, how do you know any different?
No, it was made by a rather higher level than that. It was made by a number of quite competent authorities who had access to the information and who came to this conclusion, as I think many reasonable men would do, if their knowledge of atmospheric optics and natural phenomena was not complete.
Then you're kind of go along with Dr. Menzel of Harvard.
Oh, no, I don't go along entirely with him, but most of the confusion in this subject is caused by mixing up two entirely separate things. One, UFOs. I think UFOs probably exist. And the other, so-called flying saucers, which are vehicles, definite vehicles, which are a totally different thing, and which don't exist.
Flying saucers are different from UFOs, and according to your opinion, Mr. Clark, flying saucers do not exist, but there's a great possibility that UFOs do.
I would say that there's a 99% possibility that UFOs do exist, and only a 1% possibility that flying saucers as interplanetary vehicles exist.
Well, Mr. Clark, I wonder if you could tell me what a UFO is.
Well, let me go back to, I'll be very glad to, let me go back to this report of these gentlemen who decided...
The one that Cortland is talking about?
Decided, in view of the fact, these reports and this evidence, that these things were really interplanetary vehicles. This is a conclusion I came to myself about that time as a result of these reports. And it wasn't until I'd seen about 6 UFOs myself that I realized they were not spaceships. The point is that there are far more fantastic things in the sky than anybody realizes, even a trained observer who spends a lot of time looking at the sky. And I don't see how anyone hearing all these reports and not seeing them could really fail to think they were spaceships. But they're not spaceships when you do analyze the evidence. Now, let me give my reasons for thinking this. First of all, I heard all these reports, these sightings, made by competent people, and I mean, you couldn't say they were all lying. And they were very convincing and very extraordinary and very inexplicable. And then, as I traveled around the world, I've been around the world a couple of times in the last 5 years, I saw quite a few strange things. And I have now seen, I've just been listing them, I have seen 6 UFOs. By that I mean objects which were quite inexplicable when I saw them, which could easily have been interpreted as spaceships, which took a lot of explaining, and often the explanations were so fantastic I almost hesitate to give them. But in every case I was able to find out what they were. But I'm sure that 99% of the people who'd seen them would have decided they were spaceships, but they were not. Now, this is happening all the time. Now, can I give some examples of things I saw to show you what I mean?
Please do.
Well, I was in London one day, one bright summer's day, somewhere near Regent Street, and I saw a lot of people looking up at the sky. And I looked up too, and there, a long way up, were 2 black spheres, close together, quite motionless in the sky. There was a very strong wind blowing at the time, and these 2 black discs or spheres just were absolutely motionless over the center of London. I will come back to this in a minute. I'll go on to my next sighting. I was in Brisbane, Australia, on my first underwater expedition to the Great Barrier Reef. And one evening, I was in a building about 5 or 6 floors up, looking out towards the sunset, and I saw, to my astonishment, a whole string of brilliant silver discs, roughly elliptical, flip-flopping across the horizon quite slowly with a curious oscillating movement. And I said, good heavens, this is it, you see. And I watched them go right across the sky, and this was absolutely convincing, these oscillating silver discs moving slowly. Well, that was the second case. I'll give you a third case before I come back to the earlier two, if you don't mind me taking so much of your time. Again, I was in Australia, in Sydney, and I saw an extraordinarily shaped cloud. It looked like a cloud, except it had rather solid edges, hanging above the city of Sydney. And this again was a strong wind blowing, and this cloud stayed in the same place and slightly altered its shape, but it looked like an amoeba. It was hanging over Sydney, and in one place, despite the fact there was a very strong wind blowing. But I've given these three things, and I'd like to know if you... I'll tell you, can you explain them? I'll tell you what they were in a minute, but these are the things I saw. I'm describing them as carefully as I can.
Would you care to try?
The two black discs in a high wind, motionless over the middle of London. The string of silver ellipses flip-flopping across the sky along the horizon. And this weird amoeba-shaped cloud, motionless in a high wind over the middle of the great city.
No, these sound like regular descriptions.
Quite, well...
Flying saucers.
And I mean...
I'd like to hear what you...
well, now, if anyone had told me they had seen these things, I would have been forced to accept them as inexplicable flying saucers, perhaps some kind of artifact. Well, the first one was an artifact. The two black discs close together, high over London. If I hadn't gone to Regent's Park, I wouldn't have found out what it was. It was a kid flying a very large box kite that must have been about a mile up. But it was so high that its structure was... You couldn't see what it was, and of course you don't associate kite flying in the middle of London, but it was a box kite at such a height that it looked like two black spots side by side over the middle of London.
Was a box kite.
I went to Regent's Park and saw the kid flying it.
You saw the...
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And but it was a high. I've never seen a kite so high. I mean, I say about a mile up. That's a rough guess, but you could not tell it was a kite because it was so high. Now, this is, you may say, is a simple case, but this is the sort of thing that can start reports, right? Mm-hmm. I'm almost ashamed to tell you what the flipping discs were, because this sounds so trite, and I had read this in books and I had not believed it. They were seagulls catching the setting sun. Now, listen, before you laugh at me, I was born by the sea. I have lived by the sea nearly all my life. I live by the sea now. I have seen seagulls 1,000,000 times, but only once in my life have I seen this phenomenon. Under certain conditions of illumination with a low sun, seagulls and other birds produce an absolutely convincing impression of metallic discs moving, oscillating across the sky. That was what this was. Now, this third case, this amoeba-shaped cloud, motionless over a city in a high wind, slowly changing its shape. It was a weird thing. It really sort of gave me creeps. I had to get a pair of binoculars to find out what it was. And there was a chemical plant of some kind with a high chimney, which I couldn't see, and some fumes, I don't know what they were coming out of this chimney. You couldn't see them when they left the chimney, as you can't see the smoke, as you often can't see the steam from a kettle. And it was obviously condensing a little way downwind of the chimney and then being dispersed. So it was roughly motionless in space, despite the wind, and it was slowly changing its shape. It was an artificial cloud, a byproduct of this chemical factory. Well, all these three cases are just examples of some of the extraordinary things that I myself have seen in a few years in the sky. And this is why I don't take seriously any report of anything seen in the sky. I'm sure that people see these things, they can't interpret them.
Arthur, you mentioned UFOs and flying saucers. You believe in UFOs and you don't believe in flying saucers. Isn't it possible that because you have never seen a flying saucer, or at least to your knowledge, you don't know that you saw an interplanetary craft? I call them flying saucers because it's convenient on this program. If you've never seen one, and yet you believe in UFOs, Isn't it possible for a person to see a flying saucer and not being familiar with its shape or anything about it that they could be considered to be UFOs?
Of course, it's perfectly possible. When there's so many hundreds of explanations of strange things, why on earth bring in an unearthly explanation until we've exhausted all the terrestrial ones?
We've talked on this program to a few members of an organization that's called CSI, that's Civilian Saucer Intelligence. It's located in the city of New York. And I might say that the few people that I've had the pleasure of meeting who are members of that organization are certainly brilliant, intelligent people that have excellent educational backgrounds. People like Lex Nebel, Ted Blocher, Ivan Sanderson. These names may mean nothing to you at all.
I know Ivan.
Oh, you know Ivan. I heard recently, not from these gentlemen, but from other people, and so far no one has denied it, that a few of these people, not all of the names that I've mentioned, but a few of them, believe in little men, not green ones now. In other words, actually, it's been thrown out on this program by somebody that these men believe in little green men. Now, that has been corrected, not by Mr. Mebane or Mr. Blocher, but we've had people who said it isn't green one. They don't even know what the colors may be. But due to extensive research on the part of one or two members of Civilian Saucer Intelligence, these people now sort of lean in the direction of the little men visiting this planet. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's nonsense. I mean, there's no evidence for these things, and why bring them in until you've explained, until you've eliminated all the other possibilities?
Mm-hmm. Court?
I don't think that...
You're almost speechless at this moment.
Oh, no, I'm not. I'm just waiting patiently.
I see.
I'm sorry if I've been monopolizing.
Not at all. No. Arthur, this program here, you're liable to go for an hour without stopping. That's the way we work this program. Go
Frankly,
ahead.
I think Mr. Clark is to be complimented on his examining into what he saw.
I agree with you.
I am all for that. I think there is too little of it. We need more of it. But I don't think that what your experience, Mr. Clark, is any indication of the grand total. I have seen things, too, which looked like saucers. I didn't think so, but I wasn't sure. But in a few minutes, I determined very definitely that there would have to be much more solidity to what I saw to prove to me that they were saucers. And I have never seen one yet. As far as the little men go, I'm sure Ivan Sanderson feels quite convinced in his own mind after having gone down to the, wherever that blooming place was, where the landing was supposed to have been.
Are you talking about the West Virginia monster?
Well, he went down that Flatwoods, West Virginia.
Flatwoods, West Virginia.
Yeah, but that wasn't
a little man.
That wasn't the little man.
No.
I was just trying to think of the location, but I don't feel so bad, Long John, as long as your memory, which is as long as an elephant, can't remember where it was. I don't feel so bad.
I may have made a mistake here. Ivan Sanderson is not Hans Stefansson, the...
No, not Hans Stefansson.
No. Sorry,
Ivan Sanderson is the zoologist.
Oh, I don't know him.
Hans Stefan Sanderson is the editorial director of Fantastic.
Yes, I know Hans quite well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, Ivan is a very bright chap and very well grounded. And I heard him give a dissertation one evening on these little men. As far as I'm concerned, I put it aside because I don't know whether there are or not. I certainly would credit Ivan's intelligence quite considerably because when he goes after something, he's a bit skeptical on these things. Let's say he's very skeptical about them. However, what I wanted to get back to is to some of these. If Mr. Clark feels that there are no saucers which have been around lately, I would like to just bring out a whole battery of instances here, not consecutively, because after all, that would be taking too much time. But on November 3rd, I presume you're aware, Mr. Clark, that there were quite a concentration of sightings. They started actually on November 2nd. On November 2nd, the owner of station KCLV in New Mexico saw a strange glowing object speeding southeast. Now, he could have been mistaken, no question. But the Ground Observer Corps at Midland, Texas, logged reports of a large bluish object flying west at a low altitude. And that same evening, Civilian Aeronautics Association, is that correct, Wayne? You're up on that, CAA? Tower operators on duty at the Amarillo Airport base sighted a peculiar bluish object moving through the sky. And one of the tower operators, whose business it is to know these things, said he had never seen anything so spectacular. Well, that's another one. Now, however, we get to the things that are going to be more concrete and where we can really sink some teeth in. At 1:30 on November 3rd, on a Sunday, a huge oval-shaped object was reported as landing, or very closely approaching trucks, on a highway in Levelland, Texas, or right outside of Levelland, Texas. Now, the sheriff investigated these cases, and in 3 of them, the close passage of the UFO had stopped the car engines and dimmed or put out the headlights. Now, 2 other men, Clem himself, the sheriff, and his deputy sheriff, saw the glow from the object themselves as it crossed above the highway and brilliantly lighted up the pavement. And this light was seen by 2 other patrolmen, each following in a separate car. Now, would you care to comment on that before I go into some others?
Yes.
They saw the object as 125 to 200 feet in diameter, I might add.
Well, now, this boils down to a number of separate categories. First of all, the sightings, objects seen in the sky, those are quite different from what I was talking about in flying saucers and vehicles. They're what I call the UFOs, and many of those may be an unexplained UFO. I'd like to come back to that later. But before, let me recapitulate. Anything strange seen in the sky, not close enough to get you to give an idea of its structure, that may have many hundreds of separate explanations, and I think there may be a residue which has no explanation yet. You can call this a genuine UFO, which may turn out to be quite a new phenomenon. I have some ideas on that I'd like to come to later. But now, as for the reports of things that land and come down to Earth, people see things coming out of them, I just do not believe any of those. And this one you have just quoted, contains the seeds of its own disproof. The story of the car engine stopping, because this brings me right back to 1937. In 1937, 1938, car engines were stopping all over England. They were stopping near the big towers that were being put up along the east coast, because those towers were supposed to contain a ray, to generate a ray, which would stop the engines of the Luftwaffe when they bombed England. And this report, every week you were hearing about car engines being stopped. Everybody believed this, quite genuinely, that car engines were being stopped. This was absolute nonsense. They were radar stations, and the car engine reports were being put out by counterintelligence to make people think that this is what these stations really were, that they were to stop the Luftwaffe's engines. There was no truth whatsoever in these reports, but this was a universal belief. So whenever I hear about car engines stopping, I remember the same thing 20 years ago, and there was not a word of truth in it.
Well, do you feel then that it's possible that our government are putting out these false rumors?
There's no need to make false rumors, but no need to put them out.
Well, these had nothing to do with radar towers, Mr. Clark.
No, but this is a beautiful example of the sort of hysteria that generates. Someone starts a story, and quite possibly someone sees something and they stole their engine. And then that starts the whole thing.
And then they put out the headlights, too.
Sure. They probably pulled the ignition out.
Well, we'll have to go to another one where there are a great many more cars involved.
Well, before we do that, let me take a moment to do a little piece of business. I think you wanted to get into a little different line.
Yeah, I was, now that we proved that flying saucers don't exist, I thought, one point, Arthur, in your lecture the other night at the New York Center, you said something about satellites. You said quite a lot about satellites, for that matter. But one thing was, I recall you saying that if the Russians on their satellite had used instead of on the second satellite, instead of the big dog-bearing thing, if they had put a fourth stage on there,
yes,
they could have hit the moon. Is that?
Yes, they could have hit the moon with a payload of about 50 pounds, maybe 100 pounds.
Why would they, having got one satellite up already, I don't know whether the second one was really for scientific research or what, but it certainly would have been a great deal more impressive if they had done a magnesium flare or whatever they're going to do to mark the moon.
Well, what they did with Sputnik 2 was much more useful scientifically. That was loaded with instruments and, of course, as well as a dog, and they obtained a vast amount of scientific information from that flight. So that was the obvious next one to do after Sputnik 1, to do the heavier payload in the orbit. I would say the logical thing now for the next one is an attempt to shoot something around the moon. They can do it any time they feel like it. In fact, I'm rather surprised they haven't already.
What value would it be for any country to be able to land on the moon?
What value is it to land on America? The moon is much bigger than America. And after all, the moon is only the stepping stone to the other planets and to the universe as a whole.
Well, do you think it would be of any value to us in the event of war as a nation?
No, I don't think so. We can destroy ourselves completely adequately with existing weapons on this planet. There's no need to go into space to set up military bases.
I agree with Mr. Clark. First time this evening. It's a pleasure, sir.
If we want to use the moon for any military purpose, I suggest we build our air raid shelters there.
What? I want to get back to this other little corroborating instance, because I frankly, Mr. Clark, with due deference to your scientific knowledge, which is vastly in excess of mine, I wanted to point out another sighting, however, of a UFO by a research engineer of the Air Force Missile Development Center near Alamo at about that same time.
What date was that again?
This was on November 4th, the following day.
Last November.
Yes, this past November. Mm-hmm. Stokes, this research engineer, had seen a huge elliptically shaped object which appeared between the center and White Sands. As it passed near the highway he was on, it had cut out his radio, stopped his engine, and those of 10 other cars. Now, Stokes estimated this UFO at about 500-foot diameter, which is a pretty big ship. And he said as it went by, at its lowest point, he could feel a wave of heat. Now, how would you explain this? The same way? Nervous foot?
Well, now, in these cases, you're helpless until you can go there and interrogate the people. You have to rely on your sources of information. I don't know what the source is in this case. I have to rely on the fact that whenever this happens, the Air Force sends its officers there to interrogate people. And they've spent, I guess, millions of dollars by now interrogating everyone who's claimed to have seen anything like this. And I think any reasonable person has to accept the statements of the administration through the Air Force that after analyzing all these cases, they don't believe there are any extraterrestrial phenomena involved. This is all. If one doesn't accept this explanation, then one has to assume that the Air Force is committing perjury.
Or just flipping the pages looking for the corporal again.
Yes. Now, I know the Air Force has made a complete hash of the flying saucer investigation in the early days because they didn't know what was going on, and they went every which way. But I think that now the matter has been resolved.
Major Aho.
Regarding this discussion of military personnel and what the Air Force is doing, etc., I am aware that there are a number of things about this New Mexico situation that have not come altogether to light. But I'm also aware that in the military service, it makes a great deal of difference whether you're on active duty or whether you're retired. And I am aware, and many others are aware, that such people as Rear Admiral Farney, retired, who was former guided missiles chief of the Navy, upon retirement made a public statement that flying saucers are real, that these UFOs are real, and that he doesn't know where they're coming from except that they're coming from out in space.
When you say they're real, in other words, you mean they are interplanetary?
Not necessarily interplanetary, but that I think that he meant by that they are real objects, that they are, he mentioned in this public release that they are controlled objects, and that there is an indication of a great technology involved, and it must have taken a long time to develop this technology. And by that statement, I felt that he was implying that there was definitely life and intelligence involved, and possibly coming from other planets.
Oh, in other words, you feel that he implied this?
Yes.
He didn't actually make this. What did he actually make the statement that the flying saucers are real?
Yes.
Is this his statement?
He said they were controlled, which is even more important.
I have his statement right here, just as it happened.
Can you give us?
It's a very short one.
Please.
Reliable. No, this is a lot of stuff.
All right.
Reliable reports indicate that there are objects coming into our atmosphere at very high speeds. The way they change position in formation would indicate that their motion is directed. As long as they continue to navigate through the Earth's atmosphere, there is an urgent need to know the facts.
I missed that.
Admiral Delmar S. Farney, U.S. Navy retired.
I would agree with everything in that statement. I think that is a simple statement of fact.
What did he say?
That objects are entering space from the atmosphere and that they are directed. And we want to know what they are.
He said more than that. On a nationwide news release, January 7, 1957, he said that there was a definite high technology involved, and it must have taken a long time to develop, and that these objects were definitely controlled. Now, if we were relying on the statement of one retired admiral who had a very responsible position in the military service.
What did he do?
He was former guided missiles chief of the Navy.
I see.
I hope that's a responsible position.
Yes. Another person, upon retirement from the military service, Vice Admiral Hillenkoetter, former director of Central Intelligence, and certainly here is a man that should know. If we consider intelligence, Central Intelligence as being an important agency, why, and I think we do concede that it is an important agency in the American military set up in the American government, why did Vice Admiral Hillenkoetter become a director of NICAP, the organization that Major Donald Kehoe directs in Washington, D.C.? Why did he
Is that a question?
Yes.
Do you know the answer to it?
Well, I feel that I do.
Would you want to give us the answer?
He also has made a statement that these objects are real and that the American public should be informed about it.
You know, one thing, Major Aho, this may be a very stupid question, and when you do this 7 nights during the week, you're bound to hit a few stupid ones. Do you believe in some of the contact stories? And I'm not going to ask you which ones now.
Let's put it this way, John. It's very difficult for me to put myself in a position to say, well, I will support this one or I will.
No, I don't. I'm not going to ask you that. This is not a trick question.
Yes.
Do you believe that flying saucers with Venusians or Martians have landed someplace in the States here, and that some of the citizens of the United States have spoken to these people and even possibly have had a ride in a saucer?
I would like to summarize the situation in this manner, that all through history, mankind has been very, very stubborn about accepting any kind of change or any new idea. I don't care what it is. There was a time when it was believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, and that the Earth was the center of the solar system. And every time that a scientist or astronomer, whoever it was, came out with a new idea, he was met by ridicule and opposition from all directions.
Is this a new idea?
No, it has been
It's a little bit different than an astronomer or somebody coming up with a new idea. This is a man who the following day contacts his neighbors and he says, Joe, last night a saucer landed in the backyard and a couple of Venusians came in and broke bread with me.
We have a lot more to go on than that.
More than that we have
much
to go?
more to go on than that. We have a situation today where there are thousands of these sighting reports coming from all over the world, and many by astronomers. I have before me a record by...
Major Aho, pardon me, I'm sorry to interrupt. I wonder if you could answer that question a moment, because we're going to be here for a long while, but I'd just like to have an answer to that question. Should I repeat it?
No, I know what your question is, but I would like to include with the possibility that contacts have been established.
Well, it's strictly a possibility. It isn't a fact in your mind, is
No,
it?
it's a definite possibility.
It's a possibility in mine. I think it's a possibility in any intelligent man's mind.
And the fact that we have had thousands of sighting reports coming in from all over the world, and these statements that these objects are intelligently controlled, and the statements that Mr. Clark made that there's, in his belief, that we may have been visited before, then I don't think that we should just cancel this thing out and say that for some reason, without any definite logic or investigation, we have to cancel out these sighting reports. I think that they are part of the evidence. And when you begin to put the whole picture together, the thousands of sighting reports, the radar reports, the photographs that have been taken, and there are hundreds of photographs available in color, in moving pictures, and I would say that the military services of the world have thousands, running perhaps into the hundreds of thousands of photographs. If we put all of this together, and then we put these contact stories together, and examine them, examine the witnesses, the report they witnessed these contacts taking place, we may have an intelligent program, something to go by.
Major Aho, there's only one brief comment I'd like to make. And that is, it would seem to me that if our government had as much knowledge about these things as we seem to have around this table here 7 nights during the week. I don't know what they're fooling around at Cape Canaveral tonight, down in Florida, when it would be just a matter, I would rather stall a little while and say, well, look, maybe we can schmooze with one of these Venusians or Martians. Maybe it'll be next week, maybe it'll be a month from now, and we'll make a deal, and we'll get, the inside, and it'll make Sputnik look like a large nothing.
Yeah, I think Major has really proved my point beautifully. If there are thousands of reports of contacts, that proves practically conclusively that contacts do not occur. If there are only 2 or 3 reports of contacts, those might be real. But if thousands of people report them and they're never proved, that proves that whatever they are reporting has some other explanation. You see my argument?
That goes by at all, though, Mr. Clark, because during the Middle Ages, the peasants were reporting meteors.
And they're reporting witches, too.
They were reporting meteors. These are actual physical things.
Yes, no, don't confuse the issue, though. And don't confuse the UFOs and the landing of saucers.
I was citing your reasoning there, as I don't think that's conclusive at all.
No, you haven't got I'm afraid you've misunderstood me.
Well,
these people report seeing things and meeting, and I'm referring to contacts, reports of contacts. Now, contacts are if they exist, are so extraordinary and so important that if even a few of them occur, that will very quickly be settled positively without any doubt whatsoever. I could believe if a few people reported actual contacts, just a few people, I might believe them. But when thousands of people report contacts, yet this is not conclusively proved, then it cannot be happening.
I have a question along that line that I've weighed in my mind many times when I get into a discussion with people. Say, well, these certain stories or certain stories just can't possibly be true, that they're too fantastic, etc. I would like to ask the question, Mr. Clark, that if you had a contact with a spaceship, how would you convince the people of the world that this contact was real, that you had really had this contact?
This is an excellent question.
I'm glad he asked.
I'm glad you asked that, Senator. I've often thought about this. Now, first of all, I'm a photographer, and I'm well interested in the photographic evidence. One of the first things I would do, of course, is to shoot off any number of rolls of film.
Providing...
If I had the camera with me.
And providing that the Venusians or the Martians would permit this.
Well, now, there's no reason why they shouldn't. I would just refuse to have anything to do with them if they wouldn't permit it.
You would really?
Well, I admit I've succumbed to temptation. I hope
No picture, no laundry, Mac. I know.
But I would try and hang on to them somehow and try and get a picture of them.
You would sneak it out with your buttonhole camera.
That's right.
Very good. Well, they might blank the film with the radiation.
Well, why should they do this? I mean, the point is,
unconsciously. I mean, it's...
I would like to, I hope that you gentlemen don't mind this suggestion, but I'd like to take a few minutes with Mr. Clark, and I think that the rest of you gentlemen will possibly be interested in this too, about the making of a moon. I thought possibly you could give us some of the information, Mr. Clark. I know that is the subject that you are lecturing on, and very frankly, we're not trying to blow the entire lecture by any means. But I'd like to have some information about that. Possibly you can tell us some things.
Well, that was it was first of all the title of my book on the satellite program, which has just been revised and reissued, incidentally. The post-Sputnik edition's out now. And it is also the title of my lecture program.
Who's the publisher?
The Harper's. They publish all my non-fiction, my underwater books, as well as my space books. Well, in that I've traced the history of the idea of satellites. And incidentally, it seems that the first man ever to conceive of a satellite was a New Englander, a Boston man, Edward Everett Hale, who wrote a book in the 1870s called The Brick Moon. And some of Hale's ideas were surprisingly modern and up-to-date. And I've traced it from that up to the current epoch, the interest in satellites as research vehicles, culminating now, of course, in their launching by the USSR and by the United States.
How do you compare our satellite with that of Russia's?
Well, of course, there's no doubt about it. The Russian satellite is technically a far superior achievement. I mean, it is a tremendous...
Talking about number one or number
two? Well, number one, of course, is still...
Even number one is superior.
Yes. Though, in a year or so, we should be able to do the same thing as the Russians have done. But then, of course, what the Russians have done in a year is another matter to gain.
Charles?
Arthur, there's one thing about satellites. In fact, there are several questions. Immediately, satellites are brought up. In fact, when the first Sputnik started swooping overhead, people were saying, and a few that I managed to get in contact with at the time, thought, oh my, there's this big Russian satellite zooming over New York City, and who knows, maybe at any moment it will drop a bomb or something. We are in great danger. And I, perhaps in ignorance, said, hoping to clear this up, that if they did drop a bomb, it wouldn't do them much good because it would burn up before it got here. Now, am I right or wrong on that? If a satellite, suppose they had loaded Sputnik 2 instead of with a dog, they had put maybe a little atomic warhead in there and figured out, 3 times around back to press the trigger so it would hit New York City. Would it ever get here?
Sure, if they've solved the re-entry problem, and there's little doubt they have, we've solved it. The problem of preventing the thing burning up, there are several ways of doing that. You have a specially shaped nose, or sort of rounded blunt nose, which diverts the heat away from the warhead itself, and you also have ceramic heat-insulating materials, and in these various ways you can get your payload back into the atmosphere.
In other words, a satellite could be used for war-making purposes. It could drop bombs. Seems an awful complicated way to go about it.
The word drop is rather misleading. I mean, if you don't drop a thing from a satellite, you have to bring it down in its spirals into the atmosphere. The drop may take you right round the world, perhaps a couple of times. But the existence of Sputnik 2 is proof that they can land a warhead anywhere they like on the surface of the Earth. I don't know with what accuracy, and they probably don't know, but they can get it down within, say, 10, 20 miles anywhere they like on Earth.
Well, this Sputnik is not outside of the Earth's gravitational field, is it, completely?
No.
In other words, it still maintains the orbit there.
Oh, quite. I mean, nothing is outside the Earth's gravitational field, and up where Sputnik 2 is, Earth's gravity is still about 90% as powerful as it is here at sea level. I mean, it's Earth's gravity that keeps it in orbit. If it wasn't for gravity, it would just shoot out into space.
That's right.
There's another question out there. I also hear in the war-making aspects of satellites, everyone, or not everyone, but people seem to be worried about violating air sovereignty and so forth, particularly with the fact that satellites may be going over as observation vehicles, not observation of space conditions, but observation of ground conditions. And I wondered how much observation you could do at 18,000 miles an hour.
Well, the speed doesn't matter because I have seen photographs taken from jet planes traveling at 600 miles an hour at treetop level that were pin sharp. So the speed doesn't affect it at all. The trouble is the atmosphere and clouds and that kind of thing. But there's no doubt that you could put reconnaissance equipment, long-range cameras, in a satellite, which could give you invaluable information, particularly about the movement of surface vessels, for example.
On the ocean movement.
On the ocean, yes, they could spot all ocean movements, except when there was cloud cover.
There was one thing, speaking of warlike satellites, you didn't mention any of these points, but there was one point that intrigued me considerably in the lecture when you talked about the shrapnel technique.
Yes, how to shoot up a satellite.
Yeah, would you explain that again? That was quite fascinating.
Well, there have been a lot of suggestion that we might build, or somebody might build, space fortresses which could be used to dominate the Earth and perhaps as launching platforms to threaten the world. But I think that if such fortresses were built, they could be destroyed so very much more easily than they could be constructed. They would be worthless militarily. And the way you could destroy them easily is this. The satellite, of course, the space fortress has a fixed orbit, and you know just where it is at any moment, just going round and round. It'd be a spectacularly visible object in the sky, even to the naked eye, much brighter than Sputnik 2, to be the brightest thing in the sky. If you want to destroy it, all you do is to shoot out into the same orbit, but in the opposite direction. A warhead loaded with old-fashioned shrapnel. And somewhere as it goes around the orbit, it could be on the other side of the Earth from the space fort, you explode this warhead and the shrapnel scatters. It uses quite a small charge of explosive. And it forms a cloud of particles, a cloud of shot, if you like, which will then meet the space fortress head-on twice every revolution, in other words, about every 45 minutes or so, at a total combined speed of about 30,000 miles an hour, say 10 times as fast as a rifle bullet. So if you miss the first time, 45 minutes later, you have another go at it. And every 45 minutes, the space fortress sails through this cloud of shrapnel.
Or the cloud of shrapnel through it, as a matter of fact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I wish we were half as ingenious at prolonging life and doing something for mankind.
I quite agree with you. And I hope, incidentally, that the space stations may help us to prolong life. There's some good evidence for thinking that under low gravity conditions, and of course in a space station you have zero gravity, that men might live longer. And certainly that men suffering from various, perhaps heart diseases and muscular diseases might live normal lives. And I think that the medical results of building space stations may be quite important.
I skipped a point. Didn't you say before that the Earth's gravity was just as strong out there as it is down here? If so, how do
it's a little weaker. It's still about 90%. It falls off a distance, but very slowly. So at the distances of the present satellites, it's still quite strong. For instance, you have to go out 4,000 miles before it falls to a quarter of its sea level value here.
Yeah, well, you were planning on or at least conjecturing, a space station considerably farther out than that, then, where it could be benefited?
Well, that's another thing. In a space vehicle at any distance from the Earth, there is no feeling of gravity. You're under the pull of gravity, but you don't feel it because you are falling freely. Now, this is a difficult conception, but right here on the Earth's surface, you can be weightless. You can have no sensation of gravity. If you're in an elevator and the lift and the cable breaks, you're fully under the influence of gravity, but you're weightless as long as you're falling, you see. You don't stay weightless for long. Sure. But in a space station, even if it's only a couple of hundred miles up, where gravity is very nearly the same as it is here, the total force of gravity, you would feel weightless because you are falling freely all the time around the Earth. So you have to distinguish between these two facts. that you could have this weightlessness or so-called gravityless feeling even when gravity is there.
Why would this be beneficial to our health, or at least possibly be beneficial?
Well, think of all the work we do against gravity here on the Earth's surface, moving our bodies around, climbing upstairs, and this must definitely shorten our lives to some extent.
But what would happen if we had no gravitational pull?
Well,
wouldn't I be floating?
You would float around, and you would.
How would I control myself, though? In other words, I don't want to go upstairs. I want to stay right here.
Okay, well, I'm afraid you have to have belts, but you have to have seat straps if you want to sit down in one place. But you remember, we can build space stations so you can have gravity in one part, or sort of artificial gravity in one part, and no gravity in another part. It's a very simple trick. All you do is you design your space station like a big wheel, and it rotates slowly. And if you adjust the rate of rotation, you can have things so that centrifugal force gives you a normal feeling of gravity at the rim of the wheel. And as you go towards the hub, the center of the wheel, you have no gravity. So you just...
What would happen to all of the objects that we may have, like on a table here, the packages of cigarettes, the microphones and things? Wouldn't these be floating in the air? Or would they go right to the ceiling?
You have those things in the section of the space station where there's gravity. You have them on the rim of the space station. That's where you do your cooking, and you have your showers, and you prepare your meals, and you sit down, and things are perfectly normal there. But when you go towards the center of the space station, your apparent weight, because you're no longer rotating so quickly, your apparent weight falls off, and at the center of the station you have no weight.
When we come to the hub, we would start to float?
You would float around in the hub. That's right.
Well, if we were in a room then, would I be on the ceiling?
There is no ceiling.
In a room there wouldn't be a ceiling?
There are just 6 walls. There's no up or down. There's no preferred direction. In the hub of the space station, there's no gravity. There's no up or down. There are just 6 walls around you.
Well, what would be the purpose of walking into this hub?
Well, you couldn't walk there, actually. You'd drift. It'd be like underwater. It's like underwater. And one reason why I'm interested in underwater exploring and spend most of my time there is this is the nearest thing you can get to the gravity-free condition of a space station.
Yes, but would you want to live underwater? This wouldn't be comfortable, would it?
I'm only really happy underwater.
You came to the right program, honestly.
Right. Arthur, there's one question I would like to get in. I have read, it may have been even in one of your books, I don't know, not only the various weightlessness phenomena, but the fact that in a weightless condition of free fall, a number of curious things happen, among which, as I recall, is the fact that unless you're very careful, if you're in a weightless condition, you might suffocate in your own breath. Now, what is the function there?
Yes, so the point is that when we breathe out, the air is heated and it rises away from us normally here on Earth. But in a space station, it couldn't rise because there'd be no gravity. But this is no problem. You simply have to have a very slight amount of forced ventilation. You have to have fans to keep the air changing around anyway. So there's no real danger of suffocating because your exhaled air wouldn't drift away from you.
Court?
Well, now, if you don't have to exert any effort, what about our muscles? Would they not atrophy, possibly?
This could be a danger, but you might have to take a certain amount of exercise to overcome this. But I'm thinking specifically of people who have muscular defects and can't get around, and perhaps even multiple amputees, for instance, might be able to operate, at least men who've lost their legs, they might be able to operate perhaps even better under these conditions than normal men could, because they wouldn't have so much useless weight to drag around.
Well, why? Excuse me, Major.
Major?
I'd like to make a comment on this gravity situation. We always talk about opposing gravity or blasting off into space or neutralizing gravity or the power of the motor and the energy that is needed to establish these space stations and put satellites into orbit, etc. And man has at various times found that it's very helpful to work with the forces of nature. Do you think that there is a possibility that we can learn how to use gravity for power and rather than oppose it, use it like we use water power, you might say, as an energy?
Well, I don't see how you can use gravity and get power out of gravity But I think we may one day be able to control gravity in some way or neutralize it, but we shall need power to do it. For instance, if you consider the problem of getting away from the Earth, there's a certain amount of power, a certain amount of energy required for the job, and it doesn't matter how you do it, whether you go by rocket or any other conceivable device, there's a minimum amount of energy needed for the job. This is, if you climb over a mountain, if you travel over a mountain, you have to do a certain amount of work, whether you walk, whether you travel by bicycle or automobile or airplane. And one day we may be able to control gravity and go away from the Earth much more comfortably and with less of flame and fury than at present. But we shall still need a source of power, perhaps of nuclear energy or something like that.
Arthur, I wonder if you put any credence talking about controlling gravity. Do you know about the experiments of Roger Babson? Is he still doing them, or do you know of
the Gravity Research Foundation?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if he's ever done any experiments. He's set up a fund, didn't he, to collect material on gravity.
Well, as I understand, he had offered a prize for anyone quite a substantial prize
yes.
for anyone who could find an anti-gravitic substance, and that in fact, at his research center against gravity, I guess you might call it, they were doing a fairly methodical technique of sort of suspending things in the air and holding various substances under in the hope that, like maybe you'd hold a plate of fried eggs under, and who knows, maybe it just wouldn't fall that time, and you have it.
Well, there's a lot of work going on in various research laboratories to see if we can find anything about gravity. But an anti-gravitic substance of the type that, for instance, Wells had in his story, The First Man in the Moon, so a gravity shield, it's quite easy to show that is impossible. It violates the law of the conservation of energy. On the other hand, it's theoretically perfectly possible to have a substance which has negative gravity. In other words, it goes up. It's repelled by ordinary matter. That's a different thing altogether. That might be theoretically possible. But a gravity shield is not possible unless it is powered by an external power source.
When you speak of the matter with negative gravity, this gets into science fictional concepts.
Well,
but wouldn't this, as I recall the definition of this sort of stuff, this would be negative matter, as a matter of fact.
It might be.
And if it got together with positive matter, isn't the theory that it will be a big boom? Yeah.
That's right.
It wouldn't be too handy to have this stuff around.
It might not be useful.
I don't know.
It wouldn't render the jointure inert, would it?
Well, if this negative matter met ordinary matter, each would annihilate the other, and the result would make a hydrogen bomb seem a very modest performance.
I've had something working around and around in the back of my head here for the last 30 minutes or so, and I must insist to get this out while Mr. Clark is here. We've had quite a bit of discussion about the Earth, the danger of mankind completely wiping himself out on this planet before he becomes intelligent enough to control the things he has created. Also, we have looked back into history, and we have thought about various things that have happened in the past. And the history of the world is not a very beautiful one. It seems like we have had war upon war as long as we have a record of history. And it seems that many people from time to time have risen to positions of leadership, leading various nations or countries, either as dictators or kings, and down through history we have said later that those men were insane because they plunged their nation and they plunged the world into war at various times. We have discussed these various persons who claim that they have had contacts with spaceships, and we have cast around some ideas as to who is sane and who is not sane. And as I look around me on the Earth and think about these things, and think about our nuclear program and our present ideas that about our next step with the nuclear bombs is to blast a bomb off into space, explode one out 50 miles out, or perhaps one on the moon, and blow hunks off the moon and hope that they will float back to Earth so we can examine them, and things of that nature. And something that George Bernard Shaw said comes to mind. He said that the Earth is a lunatic asylum of the solar system, And I just wonder if perhaps maybe this might be true, that most of Earth people are actually lunatics, and that perhaps the Earth might be off limits to people from other planets, and that's why perhaps they don't land in the middle of a populated area or contact the president or contact some king or emperor, because maybe the Earth people are just in such a state of development that they're not safe to contact.
Charles?
I wonder what, to get in this, I may say that Mr. Clark is a unique authority on the ideas of George Bernard Shaw, because I happen to have seen some correspondence from Mr. Shaw to Mr. Clark. And as I recall, Arthur, there were some rather peculiar ideas in this correspondence, weren't there, that Mr. Shaw was putting forth about gravity and vacuum and rocket experiments?
Well, before you answer that question, Mr. Clark, let me just tell our listeners again that this is WOR Radio, your station in New York, and this is Long John with the party line.
First, could I make a slight correction, John? You said that Harper's published my books. Well, they publish all my non-fiction, but I have a large number of other publishers who may be a little hurt.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I thought
okay.
you made the statement.
Oh, no. Harper's do my non-fiction, but Nome Press, Valentine Books, and Harcourt Brace have done my fiction. As to the points that the Major raised, including his very interesting one about the idea of the Earth as a sort of lunatic asylum, I think that's a very plausible theory. And one of my novels, Childhood's End, was, in a sense, based on this idea that we are ripe to be taken over and run properly. However, as far as Shaw is concerned, it's an interesting story. About 10 years ago now, when I was still at King's College London, I wrote a paper on space travel and its social effects, and I sent a copy of this to Shaw because I quoted the concluding lines, I believe, from Back to Methuselah, the last chapter of that, so as far as mine can reach, is quite relevant to this subject. And Shaw was quite impressed by this paper and wrote back to me. I still have the correspondence, and promptly joined the Interplanetary Society. It was quite remarkable that at that age, he would be about 92, I think then. He was still so active-minded that he was interested in this development of space travel.
Major, any further comments?
Well, I'm just inclined to go right along. This is perhaps the answer why we don't have a land in the middle of one of our populated cities or contact one of our leaders, because the destructive forces that we have built here, enough to destroy all of the civilization on this planet. I think that's pretty well agreed. The question would be, what would we do if we had something further, if we don't learn how to control these things and use our technology for the benefit of society, for the benefit of mankind, rather than for destruction?
I've often wondered, Major Aho, why it is that so many people who believe in saucers are under the impression that the Venusians and the Martians and members, or rather citizens of the planet Clarion — some people are not familiar with that planet, it's behind the moon — I've often wondered why these people who believe in flying saucers are so sold on the idea that the Venusians and Martians are actually interested in doing us only good.
No, I don't think that that's a should generally be applied to all people that are interested in the flying saucer subject. I'm rather of the opinion myself that if we're going to grow, we're going to have to grow ourselves. And if there might be such a thing that from this visitation, this touch-and-go business, touch-and-go landings and the sightings and so forth, are merely to arouse our curiosity, so we will learn that there is something bigger, something greater in the universe.
That they're sort of playing a game with us?
That's right. Showing us that
these are matured, intelligent people that are far superior to us as far as intelligence is concerned, and they're running these things around these saucers just to show us that there is something
that we can investigate and
Is this
learn
a
about the
display of
universe.
love for your fellow man and that sort of thing?
No, I think it's a display of a natural law that if you're going to grow, every person has to make an individual effort to do that growing.
Are you talking about individuals now, Major, or are you talking about nations?
I'm talking about individuals, and from individuals it becomes families, and from families it becomes communities, and from communities, nations, and an international community.
Right here on this planet, Major Aho, it seems to me that I have heard from time to time that it's been suggested that we should exchange ideas. In other words, the Russians should give us all of the facts about Sputniks, and we should give them all the facts about things that we know. And if we could do this, if we could exchange ideas and knowledge that we may have accumulated, we possibly wouldn't have wars. At least I've read this someplace I know. If this is true, why is it that these super intellects who are coming around in these saucers just playing games with us, why don't they come down and give us the facts? You know, just say, look, fellas, the whole thing that you're doing here is completely obsolete. These little toys that you have, they look like children's kites that you call jet planes and things like that. Why don't they help us?
Well, perhaps, John, it will come to that point. I think that...
why is the great delay? This has been going on for over 2,000 or 4,000, I don't know how many thousands of years. Why is it taking so long before they're going to be kind enough as big brothers to come down and help the stupid people?
Well, let's hang the sign right on man's own ignorance, his inability to examine new things with an open mind.
Examine? What chance do we have to examine, Major Aho?
We have the chance every day. I'm examining. Anyone else can do the same thing.
You're examining saucers?
Yes, absolutely. And the road is open for anyone that wants to do the same thing. I know that many people are making statements about this subject that have not examined very much of the evidence. And they discarded without any examination, said, well, this is all tommyrot.
Well, Major Aho, in other words, when you say that they're giving us a chance, and they have for the past 2,000 or 5,000 years, gave us the opportunity of examining these things, do you mean that they've just been flying around, and that's the extent of the examination that they permitted us to make? In other words, they haven't actually, or are they landing saucers here that I can go over tomorrow afternoon and take a peek at?
I think that it'll, when we begin to understand more of the picture, that it will tie in with the development of the Earth, of a greater technology, the fact that we have become airborne, the fact that we are thinking about going out into space ourselves. Psychologically, now is the time where man might best understand that there might be life on other planets already. And that he will, when he reaches out into space, he will begin to meet some of that life. But it is obvious to me that the state of conditions on this planet, that if one of these ships and a superior technology fell into the hands of any nation on the Earth that is involved in this Cold War business, that immediately we would want to make war weapons out of these things.
Don't you think?
And again, it comes right down to the same thing, that we have greater weapons of destruction. We have greater capabilities of delivering greater destructive power and so forth in warfare. And until man can overcome warfare, why, a lot of these things are just, they just take him down rather than up. And I think that we have to learn to control such things as fear and hate and envy and greed and a lot of those things that are human attributes that we just don't seem to be able to get away from. But I think that we're going to have to very soon get away from these, or the civilization is done for.
Well, we've been trying for a number of years. I was just wondering this, though. Don't you think it's rather unfortunate that these wonderful people have permitted us to remain ignorant for so many years?
No, let's not put it that way. Let's say that we have permitted ourselves to remain ignorant. Let's put the blame right on our home doorstep, because someone else cannot educate another person against their will. It's an individual effort, and it will always be an individual effort.
This is an interesting point that I've often thought about. You might argue if these superior beings are around, as I explained, I don't believe they are. But if they were around, they might in fact hold off, because if you have made contact too soon with a primitive race, you might destroy the morale and spirit of that race in the way that on this planet various backward races have died out after contact with higher races, or at least higher civilizations. I don't believe there are any higher races on this planet. But so they get an inferiority complex, a cultural inferiority complex, and die out. This might conceivably happen if we came in contact with a very much superior race to our own.
That's a rather frightening thing.
Incidentally, the question that was raised is if this is a lunatic asylum, this Earth, and our wardens are flying around. All I want to know is, where are the tranquilizers?
Well, I think that there is a point here that's rather interesting. After all, what we are lacking is not perhaps knowledge in physical sciences, material sciences. To me, these things have gone ahead at a tremendous rate, certainly in the last, 30 or 40 or 50 years. Ever since, about 50 years ago, when the first airplane was successfully gotten off the ground. But our social science, our spiritual science, has not gone far ahead, nor has it proceeded rapidly, nor in any measure kept pace with our development of physical and material sciences. In other words, man has not learned how to live with fellow man. Now, John asked, why don't the space people come down to us and tell us? We spent an evening, Saturday evening here in this studio, talking about law and order. This is one of the basic laws of the universe. I should tell you, you know vastly more about that than I do, Mr. Clark. After all, you studied this. But we must apply that same rule to our own planet here and have the nations of the world live under law and order. In other words, we know much better than we do. And I think this is the problem. I feel as strongly as Wayne does about we've got to do the job ourselves. We've had many prophets. We've had many great men who have told us a better way to live. These words are very intelligent, but we haven't exerted ourselves sufficiently to live by them. How do you feel about that?
I think that's true, and I think that every intelligent race on any planet must eventually come to the point we've reached now. And this point is when they succeed in getting control of sufficient natural forces to destroy themselves. And at this point, a race either does destroy itself or it gets through its adolescence and reaches maturity, and then it's probably safe, at least against internal destruction. And it would be very interesting to know how many races, taking the universe as a whole, succeed in making this dangerous transition. And even more interesting to know if we will make it.
Well, you know, this story that Atlantis and Lemuria are destroying each other, to me, is not at all impossible nor unlikely. After all, the extent to which, the speed with which we have developed here in this past half century, and if we keep on at this rate and don't learn to live better, I don't think we're going to see another half century by any manner of means. So for some other civilization prior to this, and perhaps a whole number prior to them, if indeed they existed,
yes,
be likely.
Yes, well, I'm thinking of civilizations on other stars, on other planetary systems. I don't believe there'd be any earlier civilization on this Earth, because there would have been some archaeological or geological evidence. And certainly there's been no technological civilization on this planet before. Certainly no civilization ever waged nuclear war, because the evidence of that would be very, very obvious. If there'd ever been, say, nuclear war on this planet, the radioactive byproducts would be all over the place, and we would know all about it.
Even though it happened some 20 or 30,000 years ago?
Oh, even if it happened 10 million years ago.
Uh-huh.
Of course, you know that we've just discovered that Atlantis never existed. These corings from the Atlantic have settled that. These new deep-sea corings have settled that point quite conclusively now.
This I hadn't heard about. What's the
it's
story
part of the
about?
oceanographic work that's going all the time. They've got...
Have you got it now? Give it back. All right, cut it there. Cut the beeper. Just a moment. I'll take it on another call. I wonder if you gentlemen will continue a moment. I want to grab this here.
Skipping motion.
Point. Earlier, Major Aho, you were talking about a mysterious cave in Egypt. And perhaps I heard you wrong, but as I recall, you said that the reason that they deduced that they must have had atomic power was that they were painting by bright lights. Was that the statement that you made?
The general context of this man's statement in this lecture, he covered all of the Far East and various finds, archaeological finds that have been made there, and especially in recent years. And he mentioned this one specific item, and I happened to hear this lecture. He stated that they were amazed when they found these paintings within a dark cave, covering all of the surface area of the cave, overhead and all of the sides. Everything was painted, and it was a terrific job of painting. And the colors, everything indicated that there were no shadows, that there had been no shadows in the cave when the painting was done. They had to have brilliant light in there in order to do this job of painting. Then, as a result of that, they began to investigate further, and they dug into various areas of the cave floor, and in the immediate center of this cave, they dug and they found lead down underground. It had been buried, covered over down through the years. There was a lead foundation right in the center of the cave, a kind of I don't know the exact shape of it, except that it was lead. And they checked it with Geiger counters, and it was still radioactive.
Lead doesn't get radioactive.
I mean, the ground in that vicinity, right around this lead, was radioactive, according to his statement.
Well, all ground is radioactive. Everything is radioactive to some extent. But this is a beautiful example of the way that people will build up fantastic accounts and complicated theories, perhaps on the basis of some simple fact. Now, we know there are caves like this in France, where there are wonderful paintings right out underground in complete darkness and beautifully colored, and they've only been seen properly. Now we have modern electric lighting. Mm-hmm. Yet we know that the people who made those caves had only primitive forms of lighting. They must have mixed their colors out in the open light, and for some mystical and magical reason, painted these caves down in by the light of perhaps oil lamps or flickering torches. And in fact, you can see the smoke marks that their torches made. There's no mystery about it except why they bothered to do it.
Why would anyone paint in the dark?
Well, actually, it's magic. It's part of their religion and part of their fertility rites and all the rest of it. But we know how they painted these things. The smoke of the torches is there, and the colors are beautiful. They could never have seen the colors properly with their torches. We can see them with electric light, but that doesn't mean to say that they had electric light.
All I know about this is exactly what I heard, and this man was with an archaeological survey group that had been working in the Far East for approximately 30 years, and he made the statement. I have nothing to verify it or support it. All I know is that he made the statement, and that they did check this area with Geiger counters, and it was radioactive only in the center of the cave.
And more than a normal Earth would exhibit.
Oh, yes, highly radioactive.
Well, one would have to have an examination by competent scientists with proper equipment, and incidentally, one can think of a lot of ways in which this could easily happen naturally. For instance, assuming that there was an extra high layer of radioactivity, this often does happen. For instance, you may have particular salts going through particular stalactites. Which is the one on the top? I can never remember if it's the stalactite or the stalagmite. The
stalactite is on the top, I think.
Right. Well, you have various deposits of minerals, and some of them accumulate in some areas, and you have radioactivity naturally concentrating.
Why would they have lead in the center of the cave? A lead foundation or a lead container. The way he described it was like something had been in this lead container, but it was buried under the floor of the cave now.
Well, frankly,
why was the lead there?
Frankly, I just do not believe this story. I mean, this is the kind of story you're always getting from out-of-the-way places. Yeah. And when you check up on them, the whole thing collapses. And there's a type of mind that likes to build up mystery about these things, and none of these cases are ever substantiated. They all eventually evaporate, and people forget about them until the next mystery comes along, and then that evaporates.
I remember this gentleman's name. It's been quite a while ago, and I just recalled his name. His name is J.O. Kinnaman, and he was lecturing under the auspices of some group that had paid for a lecture tour that covered all of the state of California at this particular time. But I'm sure that this can be discovered as to whether there's any foundation or not. But he was telling about all of the archaeological finds in the ruins that have been uncovered. That I have seen published photographs of these, and he had with him many of the published photographs in the books of these various finds.
There's some wonderful ruins in South America. We know very little about the people who made them. But there are all sorts of theories that the age of these, some explorers claim that they're thousands, tens of thousands, millions of years old. But then we might say the professional archaeologists go along and examine them, and they have no difficulty in refuting all these.
These were professional archaeologists. This man was with a professional group. And the books were published by this professional group, photographs, everything. And they had been doing that work for 30 years in Egypt and in the Far East, around the Eastern Mediterranean area. They were the group that had been doing this for 30 years.
Well,
and they were professional archaeologists.
Major, may I get in here to avoid what may be a confusion? Was the statement in this book published by the group of professional archaeologists that they had found evidences of a prehistoric race that used atomic energy, or was this just a sort of offhand lecture thing?
This was a statement this man made.
This was not in this book.
I haven't read. I didn't read the books to verify whether it was in the book or not.
I would take a bet that if the report has been published by some competent scientific organization, you will find none of this in it. This may be a speculation based on some report that is made. But if a thing like this is discovered by any archaeological organization, this would be headline news. This kind of thing doesn't remain spoken obscurely in some out-of-the-way lecture. This hits the headlines of the world, and it's because these things are never proved that they're all nonsense.
Well, I tend to disagree because... and the reason I disagree is because the history of mankind has been such that every new thing was obscure. The Wright brothers' plane, the news reporter that went over to cover the Wright brothers' plane story couldn't even get the story published in his own newspaper. Why? Because it was contradictory to what the general belief of the time was. And engineers and scientists said that it was impossible for a heavier-than aircraft to fly. And they stood on their scientific facts, and still the planes are flying right today. But anything new that is contradictory to the general trend of thinking or thought, it's just almost impossible for it to come out and assert itself if it is in contradiction to what the general belief.
This is a complete misunderstanding. This is not true. If a new thing comes out, there's often resistance to it. But in a very short time, never under any circumstances, more than a few years, if anything new and important, which is true, comes out, it is very quickly accepted, and after a while there is no further controversy about the matter. The best proof of the non-existence of spaceships from other planets is the fact that we are still arguing about it years after they've supposed to have landed. If they really were there, for example, this would have been settled completely without any shadow of doubt, just as there was no doubt that the Wright brothers flew after a year or so.
I think it'll be completely settled within a short time. I don't think there'll be any doubt except in the minds of what I like to call the hardheads. There's nothing wrong with being a skeptic. Every person is skeptical about
That's not true. No, the trouble is that there are thousands of people who are not skeptical, and that's the trouble with this whole flying saucer business. There are thousands of people who are not skeptical enough.
Well, the non-skeptics, I feel, will be convinced. If there is reality in there, and I believe there is, they will be convinced, and I think within a reasonable time.
I agree with you completely.
But I think there will be some hardheads that will not be convinced, even if one hits them on the head.
No sane person doubts evidence when it's conclusive and before their own eyes.
Should we put those people that don't believe then in a...
That isn't quite right.
Certainly, if a flying saucer lands in New York, then anyone who doesn't believe in its existence should be in a mental asylum. But at the moment, I think that most of the people who do believe in them should be in mental asylums.
Well, Mr. Priestley, fought the adoption, or I should say the abrogation of the phlogiston theory by Lavoisier for years. In fact, at the time of his death by George, he still wasn't going to admit that it was right.
Yes, this
So
happens.
that doesn't mean there's the hardhead.
No. This often happens with individual scientists. Goethe, for instance, stuck to a crazy theory of color vision until the day of his death. Newton fought against the wave theory of light. He never believed in the wave theory of light and held that back for nearly 100 years. But things nowadays happen much more quickly than this. And if there's any important new discovery, it's either very quickly completely verified or completely refuted.
So, actually, I don't think there is a great disparity of approach to these things between any of us. I personally wouldn't want to accept anything just on somebody's say-so, because there can be misinterpretation, personal misinterpretation. However, Mr. Clark, I could not go along with you in some statement you made earlier that the fact that contacts were reported in large numbers was a disproval. After all, this is an interpretation, again, of yours, because the larger number of reportings should indicate the more veracity to a situation. And again, a little later on, you said that when car lights were dimmed and cars stalled, somebody had nervous feet. Well, after all, 4 of these 7 or 8 or 9 people involved were police officers, and they were not in the same car. Now, I think it's a little bit too much to expect that all of these men would be afflicted the same way, unless they saw something that had a lot more to it than just a mental mirage, shall we say. Another thing that you said was that Atlantis was disproven by borings. Well, I believe I asked you there if they bored all the Atlantic, which obviously they hadn't been able to at this time. So there would seem to me, although you made a very definite statement that Atlantis had been disproven, that there still would be a possibility that Atlantis might have existed.
Cortland, on this subject, you started to bring this up before. How large was Atlantis supposed to be?
Charles, I haven't any idea.
Well, I wondered. You seem to believe in it.
I think there's a good possibility, yes, I really do.
The point is this: one does not have to bore every square inch of the Atlantic to disprove the existence of a large continent, which what Atlantis is considered to be. You just sort of take it every 100 miles and you're okay.
Yeah, but
we have maps of these deposits which are fairly accurate. The borings are only in a few places, but we have maps of these enormous areas of deposit, this ooze, which covers most of the bed of the Atlantic.
In other words,
thousands of feet thick. It's taken millions of years to accumulate.
In other words, you are satisfied that the borings to date have been sufficient to really have covered sufficient area?
No, but this is very striking evidence. It's not conclusive, and you'd have to sort of dig up the whole of the Atlantic. But if you have these gigantic layers of deposit which do cover millions of square miles of the Atlantic bed, and we have taken bores in several areas, and we find that in those areas it's taken millions of years for that ooze to build up, and this can be worked out quite accurately, like tree rings, like you can tell the age of a tree. And there's little doubt about it.
Yeah, I haven't any vested interest in Atlantis, very obviously, but the possibility. no real estate, thank goodness.
I'd like to just interrupt for a moment to remind our listeners that reports from Cape Canaveral, Florida, say there is an increased activity around the Navy Vanguard rocket project. Now, indicating that a firing of America's second satellite into space may be imminent. Mutual reporter Dick Bate is standing by at the test site just in case a test comes tonight so that he can give us a first-hand report. So we'd like to suggest to you to stay tuned to WOR.
Well, here we go back with good old Atlantis. And as a matter of off of Atlantis for a moment, I will have to support Mr. Clark's contention about the thousands of cases of contact and disproving it. We're talking about two different things here. There had been thousands of well-authenticated cases of people seeing the flying saucers or contacting them. This begins to mount up into evidence. Obviously, the more people who see them, the more likely it is that they're there. But when you have thousands of disputed things, that is the point, I think, that, I know I'm talking for you here, Arthur, and you're perfectly capable. I think this is your point. When you have thousands of disputed contacts, when nothing has been proven after thousands of things, then you begin to wonder what's going on there.
The explanation must lie somewhere else.
Would you agree with these two psychiatrists in Kearney, Nebraska, for instance, that when the story of Reinhold Schmidt was added to some of the others, along with the Richard Kehoe report of a landing contact near Long Beach, California, that was reported to have involved 3 stalled automobiles. These young fellows all were going to work in the morning, and 3 cars stalled, one right behind the other. They claimed that a spaceship was observed on the beach and that they spoke of 2 men that came from the ship. But in the Kearney incident, these 2 psychiatrists used this as a basis for their conclusion, stated in the nationwide press as a reason.
That he was insane.
No, they didn't say that he was insane.
Oh, I thought. Sorry, I'm on the wrong track here.
No, they said that Reinhold Schmidt told his story the same way each time. Therefore, he has a fixation, and he has to have immediate mental treatment. And they send him to the hospital very, very rapidly. According to Reinhold Schmidt's report by letter and by tape recording, he says he demanded every test they possibly had. He didn't have any counsel. He had no jury trial. He had no kind of trial to determine whether he was mentally able or mentally ill or what. And he demanded, according to his own words, every test they could possibly give him. And he passed every test. Then what about the psychiatrist's first report or statement that due to the fact that he told his story, this was the basis for their conclusion, that he told his story the same way each time. Should a man who reports a sighting of a spaceship or a contact tell his story differently each time so that the psychiatrist won't attack him?
I admit there's a circular reasoning on the part of the psychiatrists. But my point is this: if these things are happening, and the Air Force is investigating them all, if there was any doubt, if they really had happened, all these reports, if something was really there, do you think there'd be any doubt about it by now? There's these teams of investigators, official investigators, going around at government expense. Are you suggesting that they are lying to the public?
I think there's a great difference in whether one of those investigators is in the active military service or out of the service. We have the case of Captain Ruppelt, who was the Air Force investigator, and I have before me a document from NICAP in Washington, D.C., this worldwide organization that has been reporting this for quite a considerable time. And a statement in here by Major Kehoe, some of the items that he was not allowed to bring into that Armstrong Circle program. These are 3 or 4 items that indicate that there is definitely something going on, even within the active service.
To me, there are so many which are of these sightings, Mr. Clark, which are reported by very long-term airline pilots, by radar operators, by ground observer corps people. There's a list here, I guess, there must be 100 names there, of which Dr. H. Percy Wilkins, one of your countrymen.
Now, wait a minute. Can I correct that? I don't think H.P. Wilkins has seen any. It's an H.T. Wilkins.
Well, it says H. Percy Wilkins, noted British astronomer, world-famous lunar expert.
Yes, well, he's been confused on H.T. Wilkins, who lives in the same area, and it's been very embarrassing to Mr. Dr. H. Percy Wilkins.
Before we get into the discussion, I want to take care of a little business. They've just organized recently. Mr. Lester was kind enough to tell me something about it. And if you'd like further information, in other words, so many people write me letters, they'd like to know where they can sit around and talk with other people about saucers, how they can get into groups that are investigating saucers. Well, this is your opportunity. If you'd like information, just drop a card to NYSIB. NYSIB. Post Office Box 26. New York, 24, New York. And I'm not kidding you when I say to you, that's the planetarium station. Square County. That's legit. That's no gag. Just remember, NYSIB, Post Office Box 26, New York, 24, New York. Planetarium station. Now, I don't know. Maybe they meet there or something. I don't know. Maybe it's an ideal place. I know many years ago I lived at that Hotel Colonial over there. And there's quite a lot of space here right near Central Park. And who knows? Maybe they're going to land a saucer there.
I guess they will.
He explains what happened on the Armstrong Circle Theater. Is that right, sir?
That's right. That's right, John. This letter is just recently came out of NICAP headquarters. It's general information that was sent out to various persons that made inquiry to find out what happened. There were radio stations all across the country were flooded with mail and phone calls asking why he was cut off of the air, and they wanted to know.
Television stations?
Yeah, no, the radio stations.
Radio stations,
Radio stations, too.
Why, that's true, yes, they're news departments. While you're looking for the copy of that letter there, I notice you're trying to find it there. Okay. Let me just remind the people of the party line that this is WOR Radio, your station in New York, and this is Long John with the party line. We're around from midnight to 5:30, 6 mornings during the week. And Major Aho will have that letter in a moment, and he'll read it to us. And while we're waiting, let me tell you about this wonderful offer.
Yes, I'll be very happy to. John, I think that it isn't a very long letter. I'll go ahead and read this whole item. It's dated January 28, 1958. Dear friend, please accept my apologies for this form letter made necessary by hundreds of queries about the Armstrong Theater UFO program. The statement I began when cut off the air was as follows. In the last 6 months, we, NICAP, have been working with a Senate committee investigating official secrecy on unidentified flying objects. If open hearings are held, I feel it will prove beyond doubt that the flying saucers are real, and we urge citizens to write the committee in Washington, D.C. This statement was discussed with a sponsor's representative, and he agreed it would get wide attention. But later, the producer told me that since he personally was not informed, he had no choice under CBS rules but to cut me off. However, even though this action was not deliberate censorship by CBS, strong Air Force pressure previously had caused deletion of a vital statement from my script. This script contained a statement listing 4 Air Force documents never officially released, but which had been confirmed by the former chief of the Air Force Project Blue Book, Captain E.J. Ruppelt, and by another former project officer. The documents were 1. A September 23, 1947, secret conclusion by Aerotechnical Intelligence Center that the flying saucers were real. 2. A 1948 top-secret ATIC document concluding that the UFOs were interplanetary spaceships. 3. A secret Air Force intelligence analysis of UFO maneuvers, also concluding that the objects were interplanetary. 4. A secret report by a panel of top scientists convened at the Pentagon in January 1953, which urged A, that the Air Force quadruple its UFO project, and B, that they give the American people all UFO information, including secret Air Force conclusions, unsolved sightings, and photo analysis. These recommendations were officially rejected. According to one of the project staff, when my script was shown to the Air Force representative, he warned that the Air Force would immediately deny the document's existence if I were permitted to make the statement. This would also include denouncing the quoted source, their own former project chief, even though his book containing these items had been cleared by Air Force Security and Review. This Air Force threat, which appears to be censorship by intimidation, caused my planned statement to be cut off. In addition, though the program officials tried to present an impartial program, the Air Force insistence on an unfair share of the time forced me to delete many factual items refuting most Air Force claims. Among these were listing of official orders which silence armed forces personnel, citing of an Air Force letter to NICAP by Major General Joe Kelly, Director, Legislative Liaison, U.S. Air Force, refusing to release UFO reports and admitting they are classified for official use only. In case you wish to join us and help to make all the facts public, We are enclosing information on NICAP. Regardless, we appreciate your interest and your protest against secrecy on this vital subject. Signed, Major Donald Kehoe.
I think you might be interested, Major, in hearing a postscript that is on a letter that I just received this week from Kenneth Arnold. I am not reading the entire letter. I'm waiting a couple of days because this is kind of exciting and maybe something more to it. However, the postscript is this. It might be of interest to you to know that one of our major airlines advised their pilots who had encountered in their flights unidentified flying objects not to appear on a program with Mr. Donald Kehoe. I don't mean to be evasive in not giving you the names of and the airline, but if you so desired as private information, if you so desired as private information, I'm sorry. However, I'm not going to ask him for the names or anything like that. But it's an interesting piece. I've received some information from Mr. Arnold, and we might at some times use it on the air. At the present moment, I have no intention to. I have a lot of other material that should prove of great interest to our listeners as well. Major Aho, you also, I think, mentioned that you had some additional information about Mr. Schmidt, the gentleman who claims that a flying saucer landed near him when he was out in Kearney, Nebraska.
That's correct, John.
Could you tell us about that, please?
Yes, John. Might I digress for just a moment on this Kenneth Arnold situation? I was listening to your program down at Washington, D.C., when Kenneth Arnold appeared immediately after the Armstrong Circle Theater and explained on a telephone interview why he did not appear on that Armstrong Circle Theater program. And if I understand correctly, why his objection was that some real factual information was not being presented, that he knew of much better information or additional information that should have been in this program. Do I understand that correctly, that that was his reason for not...
That was about it, as I recall the conversation, that he felt there were things that were being suppressed, that there were a full view of the facts was not being given.
Yes. Well, that's what I thought. Now on this Reinhold Schmidt story, for anyone who isn't familiar with the story from the beginning, in that November, what many people now call flap, any great activity that occurs at a certain place or at a certain time in any state or area is called a flap. But in the November flap, an incident was reported from Kearney, Nebraska, and it got on a nationwide radio program, and I believe it was also on television, where this Reinhold Schmidt stated that he had been driving his car near Kearney, and he had spotted an object in a riverbed, the Platte riverbed, a dry channel, and he drove toward this object thinking that it was a balloon that had somehow crashed or landed on the ground. When he was near, when he approached the object, his car stalled, and he got out of his car and walked toward this object, and various things happened then where he claims that he was searched for weapons, that two men came from this ship and searched him for weapons. And he said
I
that
didn't recall, Lane. This is something new to me. I thought that they were pretty friendly all the while.
Oh, yes. He said they were friendly, but the first thing that happened, he said they turned some kind of a ray or something on him that held him motionless. He was paralyzed. He couldn't move. And immediately after that, these two men came and asked him if he were armed. And he said he carried no weapons, but they searched him. And then he was invited to go aboard the ship. But he stated that these persons appeared friendly at all times, that there was no threats or anything like that. And they invited him to come aboard the ship until they were ready to depart, claiming that they were making some repairs. Mm-hmm. He asked them where they were from, but they did not say. they said they made a statement according to his presentation of this that tell your people that we mean them no harm, and also they added that soon your people will know what this is all about. And he was aboard this ship apparently for about 20 or 25 minutes. He has stated in correspondence that he hopes to come to Washington, D.C. and tell his story and clear his name from the claim or the indication that he was mentally ill, because the public has never been straightened out on what finally happened. The last many people know was that he had been sent to the state mental hospital, and he hopes also to come to the New York area, perhaps, that he can get up here and appear on the program.
Well, Major Aho, there's one point in there that, unless I'm confusing the stories that you've left out, which seem to me one of the most interesting facts, wasn't this the case where the man said that the saucer inhabitants spoke High German?
Yes, he said they spoke to him in broken English.
Mm-hmm.
He could understand them. But when they spoke with each other, they spoke what sounded to him like a High German. Now, whether he speaks German himself, I don't know yet for certain. His name indicates that he is perhaps of German ancestry, and perhaps he understands German. But he made that statement.
This is the point I haven't had cleared up, because I have heard both stories that, not from him, understand, but secondhand reports that he just barely recognized the language as High German, and yet another report that he, in fact, understood it perfectly because he was second-generation American, and
yes.
His parents spoke German or something.
I am hoping to, while I'm in the Midwest area, if I can possibly do it, I want to interview him and question him about many of those fine points and find out exactly what he observed, cover the whole story, including the hospital experience and everything that happened, in order to have a complete picture of this. But immediately after this, he reported that when this craft was ready to leave, they told him that he would have to leave the ship, but they told him not to try to start his car, that it would not start yet until they had left.
Mm-hmm.
So he left the ship, and he turned to look, and he said it left with a terrific speed, which again ties in with that the reported landing from Long Beach, California. This Richard Kehoe tells down there that when he observed this big craft that was on the beach, when it departed, they said it was left with a whoosh. It was like two automobiles passing each other at high speed. So then he got in his car, and I have heard reports. I haven't had definitely had a chance to confirm this from Mr. Schmidt, but I have heard a report that he went to see a minister first, and he was very startled and shocked by this incident. And he went to see a minister first, and then he went to see the sheriff to report the incident. In his tape-recorded interview that I have a copy of, he states that he asked the authorities there to rope off this area, to guard it so that all evidence, all signs would be left there. And he claims that he was told by the sheriff that it was not necessary to do this, that they had 3 or 4 other witnesses, and that there was no question of whether the ship was there or not, that no further evidence was needed. And the information was given by a letter that I received from a person in Kearney that was investigating this situation, that the authority there, the sheriff or the local chief of police, made a statement which was recorded, that they agreed with this man's story, that they found tracks and evidence that corroborated his original statement, and they supported his story. Also, the chief of police from Bakersfield, California, supported the man and his basic honesty and integrity. Then many things happened fast. The Air Force intelligence and apparently the FBI arrived on the scene, and a great deal of questioning took place. I have a letter which states that he was questioned for 23 hours in a row, and then after a few 2 or 3 hours of rest, he was questioned for about 18 hours more. I haven't verified this definitely with Mr. Schmidt, but I think that we'll know in time exactly what happened there. Then, too, from this letter I have from Kearney, I have a statement that 2 psychiatrists, and I have the names of the psychiatrists that arrived from the state mental hospital, and in questioning Mr. Schmidt, then this situation developed where they said that he told his story the same way each time, and they suspected him of having a fixation. And his in his tape-recorded interview that I have a copy of, he states that upon arrival at the hospital, they asked the doctors asked him what he was there for, and he said, "It wasn't my idea to come here." Says, "But being as I'm here, I insist that you give me every test possible to check on my sanity." And he states that this was done, and he spent a total of 2 weeks there, and then was released with a clean bill of health. The situation develops that he's working again as a grain buyer, as he was doing before this happened, and working for a firm from Raleigh, California, known as the Value Pack Company, and he's right back in Kearney, Nebraska. He states that he's trying to find other witnesses that were involved. There are several prominent people who have stated that there are witnesses present, but he says that these witnesses so far have been afraid to come forth for fear that the same thing will happen to them that happened to him.
You mean that they'll be taken to the sanitarium?
Taken to the sanitarium.
So what did the other witnesses, were they supposed to have seen all this from a distance? Him going into the saucer, or just the saucer, or what? Does he say?
I'm not certain what the other witnesses saw. I'm under the impression that they saw a ship either descending or taking off, and that they didn't necessarily witness the...
They weren't close enough to see him being searched or going in or coming out or anything.
And exactly what will develop from that score, I'm not certain yet. But he, in his letters to me, why he has indicated that his attorneys are not interested now in whether his story is believed or not. That they want justice in this case, and they want the man's name cleared, and they are suing apparently for damages.
Who are they suing?
I'm not sure whether it's the city of Kearney or whether it's these individuals that participated in this or who it is. That's something that I don't know yet, as who the complaint is drawn up against. I have another interesting item that arrived in a letter just night before last, which is also of great interest. This letter is dated January the 30th. Dear Major Aho,
this is from Mr. Schmidt?
This is from Mr. Schmidt.
Mm-hmm.
And he states here that he's willing to come to Washington, D.C. or any place to try to prove his point, and that he is willing to pay even to the part of the expenses involved to try to clear himself.
How would he prove his point in Washington? This I don't...
Well, I think that what he's immediately after he arrived back in Kearney, he was hopeful that he would get back on a national program to show that he was out of the hospital and that he still insisted on
that he could talk rationally and so forth, that he wasn't babbling and this and the other.
And that he still maintained the same situation, that he claimed that he had been aboard this ship and that everything that he had said was substantially true. And he was not able to get on such a nationwide program. It was in the developing, but then it was suddenly canceled. So he apparently is interested in getting around the country and getting the word around that he is there and he is not in the hospital. Also, he made a statement here that he'll come if there's anything at all done, or if anything is arranged, why he'll be very happy to go and try to clear his name. But he further states in this letter that, this is of great interest because it mentions something about the Air Force. He says, the Air Force has written me several letters. They are now quite interested. I got a letter this morning from the Air Force at San Francisco, California. And then he gives the address here, which I'm not going to mention over the air because he doesn't want to make this public because there apparently some cooperation going on.
Let me slip a point in here. When you mentioned earlier that he'd been questioned for 23 hours and then 18 hours, was that by the local police or did the Air Force take any part in that?
I don't know. I don't know the facts on that. That's one thing that I wanted to find out.
Yeah.
But this was mentioned in a letter that I received from some parties in Kearney that were investigating to find out exactly what happened. But he goes on to quote from this the Air Force letter. He says, the director wishes you success in your lawsuit against the idiotic individuals concerned. Thank you very much for the assistance you have rendered. And then the signature and the address of the party.
This was a letter from the Air Force?
This was a letter from the Air Force.
Ooh, wow, that's strong language for an Air Force letter. Well, I don't doubt it, but
no, I have this
strong language.
I have this quote from him, but apparently I did notice in the news release that went nationwide, there was a little section right at the bottom that said that the federal authorities, I didn't mention who the authorities were, that the federal authorities were opposed to this type of action, meaning sending him to the mental hospital for examinations and so forth, for fear that others who had incidents, had experiences, would refuse to report their information to the government. And it might be that the Air Force had something to do with that. But this letter, and he will, if this is true, he will have a copy of this letter, an official copy of it.
Yes, he will.
And there's pretty strong language there to indicate that these parties that wrote to him are not thought that some of this was a very idiotic handling of this situation.
Well, let me take a moment to talk about one of our sponsors. I think you mentioned sometime this morning about a man by the name of Richard Kehoe. Is that a relative of Major Kehoe?
No, Richard Kehoe states in a tape-recorded interview that he is not any relation to Major Donald Kehoe, and Major Donald Kehoe has come out with a statement to that same effect. There's a very interesting study here. Here we have Major Donald Kehoe in Washington, D.C., the director of NICAP, a worldwide organization, and over in Long Beach, California, in the far side of the country, a Richard Kehoe.
Richard. Does he spell it the same way?
Same way,
on the
same
end?
spelling, yes. A Richard Kehoe who states in the tape-recorded interview that I have a copy of with me here, that he did not believe in flying saucers, and that he had seen Major Kehoe's book in the bookstand, but he never bothered to buy it because he just didn't go for this situation. And here on November the 6th, 1957, at about 5:40 a.m., he reports that he was driving to work in the Long Beach area there, and his car stalled suddenly when he was driving down the highway, and his lights went out. And he pulled over to the side of the road, and two cars following him says the same thing happened to them. This is their lights went out, and they pulled up behind him. And the amazing thing is that these fellows say that after they got out of their cars and they looked around to see what was going on, they saw a large ship parked along the beach that was landed right about 20 or 30 feet from the water's edge on the Long Beach there, and that this, he describes the size of this ship as being about 50 feet high and 150 to 200 feet long. And he said that it had a blue haze surrounding the entire ship.
Was this a saucer-shaped saucer? That's a hard one to say. Was this a saucer-shaped ship?
Well, it was more of a cigar-shaped or an egg-shaped object, the way he described it. But this word flying saucer has become so distorted now that usually when you say flying saucer, they're talking about
You look for something square, sure.
Anything that flies through the air that seems to be some kind of a controlled craft or is on the ground, whether it's square or round or saucer-shaped, disc-shaped.
Or a saucer-shaped ship.
Or
I like that phrase.
So, anyway, they got out of their cars, and they were observing this ship on the beach. And this Richard Kehoe was later interviewed by Paul Coates, a radio announcer in that area. And in the line of question that developed why Richard Kehoe indicated exactly what he felt about this whole situation. He was questioned as to whether this ship that they saw on the sand could have been actually an object in the water, some kind of a floating ship that they just misunderstood or mistook it or thought it was on the beach when it was actually in the water. And he said that they all agreed and they were all aware that there was nothing in the water and anywhere within sight at that time. There was no craft in the water with any lights or anything, and that the only object was this ship on the beach. But the next amazing thing was the two men approached them from the beach, and they came up a little stairway up to the highway where these fellows' cars had stalled, and these fellows were standing there, and apparently from the tape-recorded interview, why, their chins were hanging down. They were all just absolutely dumbfounded and speechless. And he described these two men that approached them as being about 5'6" or 5'7", weighing about 135 to 140 pounds. He described the clothes they wore, that they had tight-fitting trousers that were apparently black or dark in color. This was about 5:30 in the morning, so it was quite early. Yeah, this happened when they were driving to work. And he gave the names of the other two fellows involved. He gave their names as they were given to him as being Joe Thomas of Torrance, California, and Ronald Burke of Redondo Beach, California. And he described these fellows and their appearance in a lengthy interview, lengthy discussion. He said that they had a very perfectly formed face, that it was the most perfect features that he had seen, that their nose, their chin, everything seemed to be just absolutely perfection, and that their skin was of a different tint or different hue than what ours is. But at first, I noticed that something that was very interesting here was that he practically insisted that these were Earth people, that they couldn't have been space people because they looked so much like us. But then he proceeded to show, bring out various things that he had noticed that would make them definitely different from Earth people. But his insistence was very interesting, that he first felt that they definitely had to be Earth people. But he later brought out the fact that their ears came to more of a point up at the top, and that their uniform, the clothes they wore, was somewhat different from what we wear, except that it looked a little bit like a motorcycle driver's uniform or outfit, especially because of the trousers, and that they had a large, what looked like a large belt with some kind of a carving or some kind of inscription over on the side, and they wore shoes that had no laces. But they looked to either be leather or plastic. You couldn't tell in that light.
Well, I've got shoes with no laces on right now. I don't know why that should interest him.
Well, he just commented about that in noticing various things about them. And he said that they didn't wear anything on their head, but their hair was cut fairly short, that they it was like a college crew cut almost. And their hair was about 3 inches long, you might say, in the longest point. And it was...
Curious that you should insist so that these were Earth people, while at the same time pointing out all the things that.
Yes, I thought it was very interesting. Then he said that the color of the skin, that they seemed to have a kind of yellowish or greenish tint to the skin.
And he still said they were Earth people?
He still said they were Earth people. And I think that the interviewer probably noticed that right away, and also the people that interviewed him later. But he was so struck by this whole thing, it may be that he has never considered the possibility that these might come from space. Also, when he mentions the interview that took place, these fellows spoke to them. He said that they spoke to him in a broken English. They spoke to all three of them, and they all witnessed this situation, that they spoke in broken English, or what seemed like a foreigner would speak American that was not familiar with the language, but he said they didn't have any trouble understanding them, that they clearly understood what they meant. The questions asked ran along this line, what time is it? What is the nearest city? What is the nearest city to where we are? And these fellows told them what city this was and so forth. And there was something mentioned or asked about where are they going, meaning the three drivers that were stalled there. Mm-hmm. And one of them asked these two fellows where they were from, and they received no answer whatsoever. They didn't reply at all. And he was asked as to whether they seemed to be friendly or hostile or what. And he said they appeared to him to be very friendly. In describing their attitude, their behavior, they asked him just how did he feel about them. And he said, well, in appearance, it says, if I saw a perfect FBI man, it says these fellows would have been a perfect description of an FBI man, you might say, that they seem to be completely composed and have complete control of the situation.
FBI man?
Something.
It's a very strange way to describe an FBI man.
And he said that it says if you were sitting in a poker game, and if you had a perfect poker face that did not show any emotion or any sign of any excitement of anything, it says these fellows had a perfect poker face. It says they didn't bat an eye. And when they left, he said that they turned on their heel. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't say anything. But he said he didn't have a feeling. That he personally didn't have a feeling as they were cutting off the interview and showing any kind of resentment, that when they were like well-trained troops, that when they left, they turned around and left without any hesitation. And they marched down the beach. They got into the ship. They saw a beam of light come out as they entered the ship in some opening. And he said immediately after, when they got aboard, he said the ship left with a whoosh. He said it's the most fantastic thing he ever saw. It sounded like two cars passing at each other at high speed on the highway, and that's all the noise there was, and boom, it was gone. And they asked him, well, how did he feel about it afterwards? He said, well, we walked slowly to our cars, and he says, if you can describe a fellow who's just been cleaned out in a poker game, he says, that's how we felt. He says, we were just absolutely dumbfounded.
I'm a little dumbfounded at this point, too. Yes. But I'll have to do a little piece of business.
This is Long John. Oh, you're on already? I can't stop it.
Long John.
Long John, don't put me on the beat.
Oh, you're on already? I can't stop it.
Okay. I sent a letter to you about the zombies, you know, that, remember? I told you about the zombies.
I know.
Yes. You told me to send it on for Dave Bell, care of you. Yeah. But I don't hear Dave Bell anymore.
Well,
did you get the letter?
Huh? I don't know. He hasn't told me it yet.
Oh. But I typed that off the article from Fate, you know, you remember?
Incidentally, we're going to have the editors of Fate magazine with us on Friday night. Saturday morning.
Saturday morning?
Saturday morning, yeah.
Could you ask Dave Bell to give it up? Then it would be...
I certainly will, as soon as I see
typed
Dave.
It off. It's 4 big pages.
Yeah. All right, then.
Okay,
thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Well, one of our nice listeners, and as I say, we'll have the people on from Fate magazine, the editors, and I think you better be tuned in even a couple of minutes before 12, because I understand we're going to start right out, and
That's going to be so exciting. I've been told by William the Preston that we may even have them a second night. In other words, not 2 consecutive nights, but have them back again Tuesday. So be on early, everybody. Major.
You know, John, I've been observing Mr. Leadham here all evening, and after due consideration, I am convinced now that he is a Venusian. He sat here all this night for almost 5.5 hours, and he shows absolutely no weariness whatsoever, and I'm convinced he's a Venusian.
Well, Major, you are mistaken, I'm sorry to say. It is not Venus. It is, in fact, the planet Jupiter. Yes, and
That's the bigger planet.
This is why I happen to be the size I am, because I come from Jupiter. And you'll notice that I'm sitting in a special chair here. The actual truth is that I weigh 3,200 pounds. And if it weren't for the special construction of this chair, I splintered several the first time I was up here on the show, and John had to order this one for me. It's a very touchy situation. I don't generally like to talk about it on the air, but we Jovians do not sleep. We found it very handy that way.
You get much more time there to accomplish things.
We have more time to build saucers and think of the basic principles of the universe and to, try and exist on this lousy planet. And this is Jupiter, not Earth. Earth is a great place, but this lousy planet that we were born on, it's a real rough fight, kids, I tell you. It takes 47 hours a day. The Jovian day is 47 hours long.
I thought it was 46 and a half.
Well, that's in leap years, John.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm. Well, it's 9 minutes after 5.
Earth time. You might want to pronounce this Earth time.
Earth time. Mm-hmm. Hi there, this is Long John.
Oh, Long John.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to mention something that I thought of, not seriously,
Yes.
but the more I think of it, the more possibility there is in it.
Yes.
And perhaps all you people might explore it.
All right, sir.
Since the moon is sometimes referred to as a dead planet, perhaps it could be used as a burial place.
Since the moon is referred to as a dead planet, it could possibly be used as a burial place.
In time.
In time.
It would stop the people from competing for the moon.
It would stop the people from competing for the moon.
Yes, perhaps we could decide right now to not to compete and try to rule the world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a bad position and I can't talk. I really am not serious about it, but it sounds like it could be used in
discussions.
In discussion.
Yeah. All right, sir.
What possibilities are there? These people might end up in limbo someplace.
Yeah. Well, we
all they have to do is fill the rockets with our dead, with all due respect to our dead, and just pile the rockets one on top of another up there.
We may discuss it some morning, all right?
Yes, sure.
Thank you very much for calling, sir.
Not at all.
Hope you get better soon. Good night.
Well, that was another idea. I see one of my good listeners just telling me that we're into February.
That's right.
And what have I said? What have I been saying? I've been saying February.
I don't know what you've been saying.
February.
Yeah, I've been listening.
And it should be what?
Well, you're not disputing this man's spelling because it's correct.
No. It's February.
Well, I think February. Well, no one gives the first R, February.
Well, this nice person would like to have me try it this year.
Would like to have you try February? Well, if he says February, well, he's going to get some strange looks from people that he's talking to. I don't know.
I don't know. February.
February. Everyone says
I say February.
I'm sure that Winston Churchill says February, for that matter, if he ever happens to say it.
He hasn't even been on the program.
He may keep quiet throughout the month. I don't know, just to avoid this particular contretemps. But
that's a funny thing. You know, we've never been able to book him on the program.
I tell you what, I know a fellow in Philadelphia that looks so much like him that he'd be sure to get away with it.
See, I understand you were in Philadelphia with Major Kehoe a short time ago.
With Major Kehoe?
Yeah.
No, I lectured to the two groups in Philadelphia.
And you were not there with Major?
No.
Oh, no.
I
don't know. I heard someplace there. I think it was the day that they called me up about Schmidt.
Hi there, this is Long John. Yes. Hello.
Yes. Hello. 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 Well, I guess we have.
No, I had a Martian on.
We did. What did he have to say for himself? Did he communicate?
He called himself Bronzot.
Oh, Bronzot. Oh, that wasn't on the... I know about Bronzot. He can't go home, you understand.
That's right.
But, I mean, on the telephone, calling up Beeper, like saying that what this man just said about Mars is wrong because, I know Mac. Nothing like that.
No, but I had one time a gentleman called me 2 or 3 times, and he wanted to bring over a Martian that they had captured.
Oh.
And first of all, we had to air the studio out for an hour beforehand, no smoking in the studio, and they wanted to bring in a special piece of equipment to cleanse the air. And they brought him in, and they wanted to know if we had AC current. They had a special garment for him, and they plug it into the AC current to keep him warm.
Too bad you didn't invite them over.
No, I
didn't. An interesting guest.
Yeah, certainly would have. But I mean, on TV it would have been great. Hi there, this is Long John.
Well, pretty good.
This is Long John.
Hello, Long John. How are you today?
Well, pretty good. How are you?
Fine, thanks.
Turn your radio down, Leo. Yes, Leo. Hello. Hello. Leo.
That's a very funny thing. I'm sure that was Leo K. Handel. Sounded like him, didn't it, Russ? And I told him to turn down his radio or turn it off, and he must have disconnected the phone. I don't know. That's right. Dobermans, and we got... Well, here, what's this? Dobermans can be gotten from Mrs. William B. Hill, West John Street, Hicksville, Long Island. Phone number is Wells 10151. And Mrs. Croess, Kroess, of Bronx? Oh, Bronx. Yeah. Well, what is all this about?
I don't know. Somebody got confused. We don't want Doberman.
Hello?
We want miniature dachshunds.
No, I didn't want to buy a Doberman.
I've got Doberman.
Oh, no, I guess no. I'm sorry. Thank you, Red. No, this lady's very nice. She thought I wanted to buy a Doberman. No. I was looking for a miniature...
Dachshund.
Dachshund.
I've got Dobermans up to the eyeballs. We don't need any more of them.
No, I thought I would have one. But, I know there are places I can buy them. It's just a matter that I haven't had the time to get over there.
It takes, the trouble is that it takes a lot of time, as pardon me if I get no plug for that magnificent volume, Obedience Training by Charles Medium. In the first chapter talking about getting a pup, as I said, it takes a long time because one of the worst things you can do is go and look at one litter of puppies because there's nothing which will knock your sales resistance quite so hard as a litter of tumbling pups. And you've got to really get it up to the highest notch and go and look at 2 litters and 3 litters and 4 litters and 5 litters and take take your pick out of that. And this takes a great deal of time, which is why it's difficult to get around and find them in docks like that.
Well, it's very nice of these people to call out.
Yeah, it was thoughtful of them. I'm sorry that they got the wrong breed, though. Miniature dachshunds we want, Dobermans we've got.
Yeah, well, now we know, though, that Mrs. William B. Hill... Is that the lady who called? Mrs. Hill? Oh. She lives in West John Street in Hicksville, Long Island. That was very nice, sir.
Yes?
I don't want Mrs. H. Peters of Andover, New Jersey. Well, what can I do?
What can
Yes.
I do?
Oh, they have miniature Dobermans over there. Oh, I see. Thank you.
Miniature Doberman we want. Dachshund, that's what we want.
How big is a miniature Doberman?
Well, he stands about
What's the 7
9,
for?
10 inches high.
7 pounds?
They're very tiny little kids. They're not miniature Doberman, miniature pinchers. You have to get that straight.
Well,
9, 10 inches high, maybe, and they weigh practically nothing. They're very cute
what do they
little
cost
dogs.
about?
Well, it's hard to say. The average pup costs you about $150.
Let's talk about something else. Let's take a phone.
Hi there, this is Long John. What happened to you?
Long John.
Hello, John.
What happened to you?
I don't know. I just went to turn that radio down a bit and just reached over to turn the dial, came back and got the dial tone.
Yeah.
I remember the last time I called, there was sort of, tongue-in-cheek call, from Ecuador. And, shucks, just as I was trying to tell you something, some kind of ambulance or something went by with a little sign.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
And that was it. And I got a dial tone. It looks like somebody really sabotaging us.
I don't know what's happening.
Well, I don't know.
How's things going, Leo?
Oh, pretty fair. No complaints. I meant to drop in visit you, but then every time I want to come over, something else turns up and makes it impossible.
We've got a few letters here and all. I tell you what I want you to... Wait a minute. You got some stuff on Leo K. Handel, have you? There? You know what you could do? You want to take my phone out of that line and plug it into the line with Leo, and when I get off the beeper, will you take his address so we can send it, huh? We got a couple of cards here for you, Leo. Leo, I don't know what they are or anything, but don't give me your address now. In other words, when you and I are through talking, we're off the beeper.
Listen.
Yes, Leo.
What I called up to say was that I'm very, very interested in the fact that there's a possibility that you might be on earlier in the evening, and I think it's about time that they recognize that people other than we who work all night would be interested in your type of program.
Well, Leo, the only problem is, I think you realize that I could not do a program like this in an hour, so the only way I could do it would be taking the best of the week or the best of 2 weeks ago and edit it down so that you'll get all the meat and no potatoes.
Well, naturally. I mean, there couldn't be any other method of programming it. You couldn't let people talk, off the cuff and expect to get anything in an hour. Now, I know if I'm talking off the cuff without any preparation, I can talk for 4 hours. And in 4.5 or 5 hours, I wind up saying nothing, Imagine how little I'm saying in an hour.
Yeah.
And I imagine that's true to a lesser degree with most other people. So I suggest that you do sort of take the meat from, some of these 5.5-hour programs. Mainly some of the programs where Major Markov was on, I think, would be very good.
Oh, yeah.
I think that would really start the ball rolling, and then you could follow through with some of those saucer stories. Howard Menger, I think, would be excellent. Van Tassel and a few of the others in that field. And then, of course, you could follow through with as a naturopath or an argument on hypnotism, really taking the meat out of those discussions and putting them on an hour program. I think that would be terrific. I, for one, would make it a point to listen in, and I have friends, who can't stay up as late as got to go out and earn that bread, in order to live. And so they can't, spend that time. And they always say to me, gee, wouldn't it be great if you were on a little earlier? We'd love to listen to that. In fact, we might even, take a real interest, especially in Homer Boomer. In fact, there's a gigantic move here now in Newark to form a Homer B. Boomer society, whose main purpose would be to propagate the name and fame of Homer B. Boomer, the rightful inventor of the boomerang.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of candidates, including members of the Newark Police Department, whose names I won't mention because these men are very interested in joining, and they're all in favor of Homer B. Boomer.
Well, fine.
And if anything happens on that, I'll let you know.
Thank you, Leo. And Leo, wait a minute. Are you ready, Dave?
All right, take me off the beeper. I can't help because my radio's off.
All right. So long.
So long,
Good night.
And this is WOR Radio, your station in New York, and I think we're going to have to wrap it up for another morning. In another couple of minutes or so. I don't know what it is. I feel really worn out. I guess it's because I haven't been to bed for about 30 hours.
We were running around like mad lining up that phone call from Canaveral for about half an hour, which is enough to wear anybody out.
Say, John, I wondered, have you heard any new good interplanetary jokes on the interplanetary orbit lately? Has anything new come in on that interplanetary orbit?
No. Do you know something?
No, I've run out of jokes. I told last ones I'd heard. I just wondered if you'd heard any new ones.
No. From time to time in the mail, but I'm just catching up with some of the mail that I've had on hand, and we're trying to get it sorted out. We certainly appreciate the fact that the people on the party line are kind enough to send in the cards and letters. Sort of brings us up to date as to what they think about the program. And, who knows? Maybe we will, maybe we won't.
The only joke I can think of, you play bridge, don't you, John?
I haven't played bridge in years, and I forget now. Is that what you use the cue stick with? Is that the game?
No, you use the mallet, and you have the little hoops on the wall.
Oh, yeah, I knew something like that.
The horrifying story, the other night, Betty and I had been thinking we'd brush up on our bridge, so we went over to some friend's house, and we were talking, and said, you people don't play bridge, do you? And they said, well, we're not very good at it, but, we play. And so we said, well, let's try a few rounds and see what happens. So we sat down at the table and got the cards out and got a scorecard and everything, all ready to play. And you may not believe this, but the guy says to me, I'm a little dim on it, how many cards do you deal to a person for bridge? So we folded up the table, folded up the cards, and went away. And that's my sad story for the night. Oh, man, that was too much. How many cards to a person? Ooh-ha.
Major, do you see Major Kehoe often in Washington?
I do once in a while. However, we're both so busy that it's just a madhouse all the time. I'm pounding the corridors up in Congress or traveling around the country. But I try to spend quite a bit of time up in Congress because I think it's quite important, and they're very much interested in getting more interested all the time on the Hill.
What do you think of the move to go out in the Mojave Desert with lots of cans of white paint and make a huge sign with letters about 3 miles high saying Martians go home? You go along with that?
No.
No? That would take a lot of the load off of you and Major Kehoe, that's for sure.
You're a funny bit, Charles. Very, very
We'll
good.
have to use it on the air sometime.
Yeah, that's right. I think it would have been great if we would have been on the air tonight. It was a night off, though.
Well, this way we're going to be, all rehearsed for tomorrow night.
Yeah.
Or for tonight, or was it yesterday night? I get a little confused about this.
What is this? This is Saturday or?
I think this is the second Thursday in the week or something like that.
I think you're right.
Yeah, it gets confusing around here. This is either tomorrow night or yesterday morning. I'm not sure which right now.
Well, I can tell you one sure thing, that it's really been a pleasure talking with the people on the party line. And my name is Gift Campbell. I'm around from 12 to 5:30.
Rodney Dexter playing the part of Alan.
And I sincerely hope that many of the people on the party line will send a card or a letter to me. Gift Campbell. Send it to WOR. And that's Harry Carlson, your sunrise serenader. He'll be along in just a couple of minutes.
Don't forget Hortense.
That's right. Neighbors, I think we'll have to wrap it up, and we should at least have 1 minute of silence in respect for the great Giff Campbell, the gentleman that has done more to keep radio where it is today.
40% better than ever before.
That's it. Thanks very much, Major Aho, for joining us. We appreciate it a lot.
Thank you, John. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
And I know that the people listening to the program will certainly be happy to go over to the New York Center, where Major Aho and Cortland Hastings will be giving a lecture on Thursday, isn't it?
Thursday night.
Thursday night, that's right. Russell Ticklepaw, engineer, and Al Nielsen, the old junk man. And we'll all be back with you again tonight at midnight. And I hope you'll be joining us. So if you're getting up, I sincerely hope you have a very, very pleasant day. And don't forget to stay tuned to Harry Carlson and John B. Gambling. And if you're going to bed, get a good night's sleep. And sleep real good. Bless you.